Chapter 892. Stubborn fool. Wang Chong coldly sneered, a harsh light in his eyes. Although Wan Hapelua's sudden attack was abrupt, Wang Chong had apparently predicted it. Boom! As Wan Hapeluo and his tribesmen attacked, Wang Chong's body exploded into the air like a hawk. Clang! The countless plates of armor on his body clattered to the ground. Clang! The woozy steel sword on Wang Chong's body exploded with countless rays of sword chi that slashed at Wan Hapeluo. But while Wang Chong was fast, someone else was even faster than Wang Chong. Wan Hapeluo, you've truly disappointed me far too much. A loud, thunderous voice suddenly rang out in everyone's ears. The voice was filled with deep disappointment. Upon hearing this voice, the savage Karluk leader Wan Hapeluo seemed to be pricked by something. His entire body trembled, and he almost lost his grip on the giant axe in his hand. He cried out involuntarily, "Who are you?" "Lord Protector General." Wan Hapeluo was infamous and never admitted defeat. Wang Chong was not qualified to make him utter the words Lord Protector General. In the entire army, only the Anshi war god, Gao Xianji, could do so. Rumble! Before Wan Hapeluo could finish speaking, a storm of destructive energy suddenly appeared in Wan Hapeluo's perception, approaching him with astonishing speed. Wan Hapeluo's face instantly turned as white as paper. Boom! Two heaven-shaking booms resounded through the air, and as countless people looked on in fear, three figures collided near the gates of Talas. Majestic stellar energy surged out like a tsunami, sweeping away the surrounding crowd. In a radius of 100 zhang, everyone was pushed to the side, none of them able to stand. Not good. Be careful. Their shockwaves are too strong. Retreat quickly. It was chaos all around. Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, and Wan Hapeluo were all peak experts of the Tang dynasty. A battle between experts of this level was not something that experts of other levels could approach, much less interfere in. But the chaos disappeared as quickly as it came. The overwhelming and powerful stellar energy waves disappeared in the blink of an eye. By the time the surrounding people got up from the ground, the clouds had dispersed and the rain had stopped. The battle was already over. My lord! Xue Qianjun crawled up from the ground in a suit of armor. He was just about to join the battle when he raised his head and saw the scene in front of him. He was stunned. In front of the city gate, Wang Chong stood motionless, his back to him. One hand gripped the wood steel sword, the other gripping Karluk chief Wan Hapeluo's neck, his feet off the ground as he raised him high into the air. Wan Hapeluo struggled as hard as he could, but to no avail. Wang Chong's palm was like a pair of iron pincers, firmly holding him in place. And next to the pair, Gao Xianji stood like a towering mountain, motionless and motionless. Everything was frozen in place, as if time had stopped. No one knew what had just happened, but there was no question that the battle was over. No matter how formidable Wan Hapeluo was, he could not possibly contend against two protector generals of the Tang dynasty working together. Lord Protector General, Lord Protector General, I've been wrongly accused. Listen to my explanation. Wan Hapeluo's face was pale and his expression panicked as he struggled. Although Wang Chong had gripped his neck, the true lethal attack had come from Anshi Protector General Gao Xianji. Even though he had been greatly weakened by the successive battles, a peak Saint martial existence like a great general was not someone that Wan Hapeluo could compare to. Gao Xianji had not killed him, but he had sealed off all the acupuncture points in his body. Wan Hapeluo had a body full of strength, but he could not use it. Wan Hapeluo, you've truly disappointed me. Before everyone's gazes, Gao Xianji finally spoke. There was an indescribable coldness on his face. 2 months of fierce battle had not broken him, but the betrayal of the Karluks had left this invincible Anshi war god feeling a deep exhaustion. I don't mind that you accepted the gold and silver of the Arabs. After all, the Karluks are mercenaries, and there's no reason to reject the gold and silver of a competitor. Even if you take it, you don't necessarily have to work for them. But for the sake of 10 chests of gold and silver, you actually wanted to betray the Tang dynasty, collude with the Arabs, and lead bandits into the pass. You've truly disappointed me. It turns out that 10 years of fighting shoulder to shoulder was only worth 10 chests of gold and silver. "Milord, it's not like this, it's not like this." Wanhaplua's face was ghastly pale, his body hovering in the air, his hands struggling against Wang Chong's palms, but to no avail. "It's not like this. You're right. The Arabs naturally didn't just give you 10 chests of gold and silver. If my guess is correct, the Arabs must have promised you that once the Anshi Protectorate army was destroyed, they would do everything in their power to support you and the Karluks in ruling the western regions." Wang Chong coldly sneered as he gazed at Wanhapeluo, his words piercing through his heart. Buzz! Wanhapeluo had been struggling, but these words seemed to deal a heavy blow. His face paled even more, and his hands powerlessly dropped to the ground. Wang Chong looked at Wanhapeluo, his eyes brimming with derision. Mercenaries had no morals to speak of. In their eyes, everything had a price tag, and the only thing that mattered was whether someone could pay it. Wanhapeluo and the Karluks had believed themselves to be a secret, but how could they have escaped his notice? If he had not appeared at the Battle of Talas, the Anshi Protectorate army would have been destroyed, and the Tang dynasty would not have had enough soldiers, quickly losing Anshi, Qixi, and the entire western regions. And the Karluks had defected at the last moment. As the heroes who had dealt a heavy blow to the Anshi Protectorate army, they had truly reaped the greatest benefits after the battle. After the western regions, without the Tang dynasty, they had become one of the strongest factions in the western regions. But there were times when the plans of man outstripped those of the heavens. After the Battle of Talas, the Arabian Empire had originally planned to unite the western regions, the Tang dynasty, the Turks, the Uzan, and any other place it could see. Alas, the Arabs had made a strategic mistake. After defeating the Tang dynasty, they had pushed into the plateau, intending to conquer the nearby Uzan Empire, completely unaware of the altitude sickness. In the end, they had suffered a heavy blow there and had been forced to halt their expansion. The Karluks' dream of acting as Arabia's agent and ruling over the western regions had been shattered. But even so, the Karluks had been the greatest beneficiaries of the Battle of Talas. The entire tribe had flourished like never before. The honest and trustworthy, the loyal to their country, had been buried in a foreign land, never to have a good end. Meanwhile, the treacherous had grown stronger and flourished. There was nothing in the world more ironic than this. When the former Wang Chong had heard of the crushing defeat at Talas and the success of the Karluks, he could only clench his fists in helplessness. But now that they had come back to life, the Karluks were delusional to think that they could rely on betraying the Tang dynasty and the Anshi Protectorate army to obtain glory and wealth. Ha! Suddenly, a long sigh came from next to him. Gao Xianji glanced at Wanhapeluo and shook his head, disappointment in his eyes. Wanhapeluo, did you really think that you could hide your actions from me? Bizizi. Wanhapeluo's body trembled as he raised his head, his eyes wide as if he had been struck by a bolt of lightning. In truth, I already had a feeling and a few guesses. But after all these years of life and death, I didn't believe that you would betray me. Long before we left for the Shur Kingdom and took Talas, someone told me that you were colluding with the Arabs and preparing to betray the Tang dynasty. But at the time, I didn't believe it, so I suppressed all those voices. After 2 months of fierce fighting, the Karluks suddenly refused to fight and even deliberately made trouble. I knew all of this, but I pretended not to know. Even at night, when some strange birds flew over the city and landed in the Karluk camp, I didn't investigate. Wanhapeluo, do you know why? Gao Xianji turned his head to Wanhapeluo. All was deathly still. Wanhapeluo did not speak, but the light in his eyes slowly dimmed. All this time, he had believed that he had done everything without anyone knowing. He had never imagined that Gao Xianji had already known. Those who walk different paths can't make plans together. These mercenaries only fight for money and have never received the influence of benevolence, righteousness, or morality. In the end, they're not our kind of people. Wang Chong finally spoke. Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli, the 2 Anshi Protector generals, had reacted far too calmly. When he had criticized Wanhapeluo, they had not reacted at all, as if they had predicted this would happen. Wang Chong had found it strange at the time. Even if he had been on guard, why had such a thing happened in the end? But now, Wang Chong understood that it could all be summed up in one word: too soft-hearted. Although Gao Xinji was known for his callous and unyielding image, that was only to his enemies. To the people at his side, to those he trusted, he had a completely different side, warm and soft. Gao Xinji was a Hu. But he was a Hu who admired the glory of the Tang dynasty and the culture of the Central Plains. He had also received the most orthodox education of the Han Confucian school and the culture of the Central Plains. In this aspect, although he looked like a Hu on the outside, he was a pure Han at heart. In this aspect, he was completely different from Wanhe Pei Luo and the other Hu. When one interacted with Gao Xianji, his bearing and demeanor made it easy for one to forget his identity and feel that he was no different from a Han, inspiring admiration. But the compassionate cannot command soldiers, and Gao Xianji's soft-heartedness had ultimately led to the destruction of the Anxi Protectorate Army, the fall of the western regions, and his future death. A general could not be soft-hearted, because a moment of soft-heartedness would lead to an unimaginably massive disaster that would eventually lead to unimaginable casualties. In this aspect, even though Gao Xinji was known as the war god of the western regions, he was still not a qualified commander. Chapter 893. Wanhe Pei Luo, I gave you a chance. Everything was your choice, and I have nothing else to say. Protector General Wang, it's no longer appropriate for me to appear in this matter. I'll leave the rest to you. Gao Xinji turned his head, his back to Wanhe Pei Luo. He closed his eyes and no longer spoke, a trace of sorrow appearing on his resolute face. The most difficult thing in the world to accept was not encountering a powerful foe, but the betrayal of one's own people. If possible, Gao Xinji would never have wanted everything to fall to this level. Lord Protector General, be at ease. I know what to do. He won't feel any pain. Wang Chong froze for a moment, and then he spoke, a hint of surprise in his eyes. Gao Xinji truly lived up to his reputation as a famous general of his generation, the war god of Anxi. Wang Chong had originally believed that Gao Xinji would plead on Wanhe Pei Luo's behalf for the sake of their friendship, but he hadn't expected him to make such a decision so quickly. This made Wang Chong look at him in a new light. Wanhe Pei Luo, you chose your own path. If you fail, you must pay the price. When you reincarnate in your next life, remember not to make an enemy of the Tang dynasty. This is not something a puny Karluk like you can contend against. Wang Chong raised his head and indifferently said. Wanhe Pei Luo lowered his proud head and said no more. Winner takes all, and that was all. Buzz. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong pushed the great yin-yang heaven creation art to its limits, allowing Wanhe Pei Luo's boundless energy to flow into his body like a raging river. In just a few seconds, Wang Chong's already powerful energy swelled once more. The battle was imminent, and the Arabs were still lingering in the distance. This was an enemy of unprecedented power, and everyone knew that this was a fierce and unpredictable battle. Wang Chong needed even more strength to change the course of this battle. Wanhe Pei Luo was the leader of the Karluks and possessed incomparably powerful martial arts. He was a natural furnace, and Wang Chong would not give up on such a high-quality source of strength. Time passed in the blink of an eye. After absorbing Wanhe Pei Luo's energy, Wang Chong's strength advanced by leaps and bounds, soaring all the way to the 7th level of the Saint Martial realm. His stellar energy surged like mercury, and his eyes shone like stars. Kacha! Just as Wanhe Pei Luo's internal energy was about to be sucked dry, Wang Chong's stellar energy poured in, instantly shattering Wanhe Pei Luo's meridians and snapping his neck. Take him away. Give him a slightly more dignified funeral, state his merits, and state that he died because he betrayed the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong slowly put down Wanhe Pei Luo's corpse and beckoned behind him. After all, Wanhe Pei Luo had worked with the Anxi Protectorate Army for many years, and Gao Xinji and the others would probably not be able to accept his death, so they would have to take care of the rest. Thus, Marquis, your subordinate will take care of it. Xue Qianjun quickly took Wanhe Pei Luo's corpse away. Thank you. Once Xue Qianjun had left with Wanhe Pei Luo's corpse, Gao Xinji finally turned his head and sincerely thanked Wang Chong. A traitor did not deserve a dignified funeral. Wang Chang's willingness to write down his achievements on his tombstone was clearly taking into consideration the sentiments of the Anxi Protectorate Army. Wang Chong only nodded and said nothing more. Lord Protector General, Wanha Peiluo is dead, but what about these people? The Vice Protector General of the Anxi Protectorate Army, Cheng Qianli, said, his words immediately attracting everyone's attention. Wang Chong turned his head and saw that Cheng Qianli was standing at the gate of Talas like a mighty Vajra. In his hand was the Karluk leader known as Guli, and around him, the other Karluk leaders had also been captured. While Wang Chong and Gao Xianji were dealing with Wanha Peiluo, Cheng Qianli had also led his men to capture Wanha Peiluo's subordinates. With Cheng Qianli's strength as a peak brigadier general, dealing with these Karluk subordinates was an easy task. Guli and the others hadn't even had a chance to send a signal back into the city. The sight of Cheng Qianli and his captured Karluk officers instantly silenced everyone, all eyes focused on Guli and the other Karluk officers. Although Wanha Peiluo was dead, his subordinates were still alive. How to deal with those Karluks who had not yet received the news and had not yet rebelled was a major problem. Fortunately, Cheng Qianli had reacted quickly and stopped them. Otherwise, the city would have been in chaos. Lord Protector General, how many Karluks are left in the city? Wang Chong suddenly stepped forward and asked. There are around 15,000 Karluks in the city, Gao Xianji replied. Isn't that even more than the Anxi Protectorate Army? Doesn't that mean they have more soldiers than the Anxi Protectorate Army? Isn't that even more than the Anxi Protectorate Army? Gao Xianji's tactics couldn't be said to be too wrong. He was using the elite Anxi Protectorate Army as the vanguard, with the Karluks and the other mercenaries taking over from the rear. This sort of tactic wasn't a problem when he had the upper hand, but when he ran into a powerful foe, the problem became apparent. The 15,000 Karluk mercenaries were even more than the Anxi Protectorate Army. If they rebelled, the consequences would be unthinkable. The Anxi Protectorate Army was in no shape to suppress them. This isn't the only thing we're worried about. The Anxi Protectorate Army isn't just recruiting Karluks. There are also Ferganans and other mercenaries. If the Arabs can find the Karluks and bribe Wanha Peiluo, they can also bribe other mercenaries, including the Ferganans. Cheng Qianli said. The Anxi Protectorate Army had two major mercenary allies, the Karluks and the Ferganans. If the Karluks could betray, the Ferganans could do the same. One Karluk was barely enough to deal with, but if even the Ferganans could be bribed, the Anxi Protectorate Army would truly be in danger. Gao Xianji said nothing, but his thick brows were deeply furrowed. It was clear that he was also worried. Once bitten, twice shy. Although everyone near the city gate had maintained their calm, the Karluk betrayal had dealt an unprecedented blow and shock to all of them. Something that they had once firmly believed had been overturned, and they couldn't help but doubt it. If that's what you're worried about, there's no need for that. Wang Chong gave a carefree smile. He could understand the Anxi general's mood, but the Ferganans' betrayal was truly a groundless worry. Wang Chong had no way of confirming the other tribes, but the Ferganans were truly the staunchest allies of the Tang dynasty. This was because Wang Chong clearly remembered that when Gao Xianji and the others had retreated from Talas, before Li Sai had even become his subordinate, the Ferganans had retreated with them. Moreover, in the white stone ridge not far from Talas, the invincible great general Li Sai had killed quite a few Ferganans, cleaving them in two along with their horses. The white stone ridge was not far from Talas, and because so many Ferganans had retreated, the Ferganans had been blocked. At the time, the Karluks' sudden defection had dealt a massive blow to the Tibetans, causing them to develop an unprecedented distrust and suspicion of the Hu. The only people on the battlefield who had not fled were the Karluks. The fact that the Ferganans had fled with them clearly meant that they had not betrayed them or colluded with the Arabs. Later events had proved that the Ferganans had been wrongly accused. After the Battle of Talas, they had always been the target of suppression. The Karluks had envied them, so they had done everything in their power to humiliate them. In the end, the Ferganans had managed to survive. Later on, when 5th Prince Li Heng ascended to the throne, he had contacted them, and the two sides had fought side by side. In Wang Chang's view, The Anxi Protectorate Army's suspicion of the Karluks was completely unnecessary. Protector General Wang? Cheng Qianli and the other Anxi generals turned to look at Wang Chong in surprise. Why is Lord Protector General so certain? The most important task for the Anxi Protectorate Army was to cleanse itself of the suspicion of the Ferganans and the other mercenaries. The more than 220,000 Arab soldiers were still watching from the outside, and if they could not eliminate the possibility of colluding with the Arabs, the entire Tang army would be in grave danger. It could be attacked from the front and rear at any moment, a fatal threat. In the current situation, Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli, as commanders of the Anxi Protectorate Army, had spent many years with these mercenaries, fighting side by side. Even they could not determine if these people were suspicious or not. On the other hand, an outsider like Wang Chong was certain that there was no problem with the Ferganans. The generals couldn't help but find this rather strange. Heh! As if already knowing what they were thinking, Wang Chong faintly smiled and confidently said, "This isn't too difficult to guess. This isn't too difficult to guess. If the Arabs want to sow discord, they only need to bribe the largest mercenary group. Bribing several mercenaries at the same time seems more reliable, but the more people they bribe, the easier it is for the news to leak out. The Arabs wouldn't do something so foolish. Moreover, bribing a single Karluk requires 10 chests filled with pearls, agate, jade, and jewels. Even if the Arabian Empire is the wealthiest in the world, it wouldn't have that much money to throw around. Lord Protector General's words are reasonable. If the Arabs had done this, we would have received the news long ago. The Karluks wouldn't have been able to hide it from us so well." The generals nodded at Wang Chong's words, their expressions relaxing. Although Wang Chong was an outsider and didn't understand the situation in the Anxi Protectorate Army, his analysis was reasonable. In truth, there's another reason. Wang Chong paused for a moment, a bright light flashing through his eyes. "In this battle of Talas, I only detained one Karluk tribesman. The battle was so intense that if the Arabs had bribed anyone else, the gates of Talas would have been broken long ago. There's no way that nothing would have happened until now. Moreover, it's been so long since the Ferganan tribe has shown any signs of activity regarding Wanha Pelua's matter." Protector General Wang's words are reasonable. "Qinli, go and take care of this matter. Explain the whole story and calm them down." Gao Xianji finally spoke. "In addition, Protector General Wang, what do you think about these Karluk warriors?" Gao Xianji was not a person without a mind of his own. The fact that he had asked for Wang Chong's opinion was enough to show that Wang Chong's methods had left a deep impression on him. At the very least, every word that Wang Chong spoke carried a great deal of weight in Gao Xianji's mind. Not too long ago, Gao Xianji had snorted disdainfully at Wang Chong. This was enough to prove Wang Chong's abilities and methods. 15,000 people? It'll take some effort to kill them all, Wang Chong indifferently said. Wanha Pelua's deputy generals felt their hearts thump at Wang Chong's words, and their faces instantly turned ghastly pale. But in the end, there's still a decent fighting force. If these fellows know what's good for them and cooperate, we might be able to spare their lives. Chapter 894. Wait a moment. Milords, betraying the Tang dynasty was Wanha Pelua's idea. He was blinded by greed, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. Milord, please give us a chance. Our Karluk tribe is willing to fight to the death for the Tang dynasty. Guli, the Karluk deputy leader captured by Cheng Qianli, suddenly felt his knees go weak, his face pale as he loudly shouted. As soon as these words came out, there was silence all around. Gao Xianji stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes closed. No one could tell what he was thinking. Cheng Qianli and the other officers of the Anxi Protectorate Army turned to Wang Chong. Wang Chong had been the one to discover the Karluk plot, and Gao Xianji had closed his eyes and said nothing. It was clear that he had given the initiative in this matter to Wang Chong. Moreover, the relationship between the Anxi Protectorate Army and the Karluks was too close, making it unsuitable for the Anxi Protectorate Army to handle this matter. On the other hand, Wang Chong, who had no relationship with the Karluks, had no stake in this matter, so he could fairly handle this matter. Can I trust you? Wang Chong sneered as he stopped in front of Guli, his eyes filled with disdain as he looked down on this Karluk deputy leader. After doing such a thing, can the Karluks still be trusted? "Milord, please give us another chance. I know that it's very difficult for you to trust us, but I swear on the gods of the tribes above the 9 heavens that our Karluk tribe will never rebel again. Moreover, aren't our people still in Milord's hands? If our Karluk tribe shows even the slightest hint of betrayal, Milord need not show any mercy. Kill them all. Our wives and children are all in Milord's hands. Milord can trust that we will not dare to act recklessly." Guli lowered his head and clenched his teeth. Wanhapelua was already dead, and the situation was hopeless. Guli was well aware that the lives of every member of his tribe, including the 15,000 Karluk warriors in the city, rested on his words, and in the hands of this young protector general of only 17 or 18 years of age. With a single word from him, the famous Karluk tribe of the western regions, which had existed for over 1,000 years, would vanish into thin air and be erased from the face of the western regions. Wang Chong did not speak. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Guli, Goldo, and the other Karluk leaders knelt on the ground, not saying a word. Their faces were all pale, and an indescribable nervousness enveloped them. Before they knew it, large beads of sweat had appeared on their foreheads. Life and death could be decided in an instant. As long as this Chishi protector general of the Tang dynasty shook his head, someone's head would roll to the ground. The Karluks had always been fierce, or else they would not have become allies of the Anshi Protectorate army. However, these people, who had experienced so many battles without so much as a frown, were now so nervous that their bodies were trembling uneasily. Wang Chong saw their reactions and sneered. He raised his head and glanced at Anshi Vice Protector General Cheng Qianli. Cheng Qianli hesitated for a moment before finally nodding. Wang Chong turned his head to the nearby Gao Xianji. Gao Xianji did not shake his head, nor did he nod, but his eyes had already given his answer. "Consider yourselves lucky." Wang Chong coldly chuckled as he finally spoke. Phew! Upon hearing these words, the Karluk chieftains immediately let out a long sigh. Their faces were pale and they slumped to the ground as if on the verge of collapse. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of Karluks had escaped death. After all the battles they had experienced, nothing had been more shocking than this moment. There had been no glint of swords, no bloodbath, but it had been even more dangerous. Guli, don't celebrate too early. No one can tolerate betrayal. Sparing them doesn't mean forgiving them. Karluks, I never imagined that you would betray us. Cheng Qianli sternly said as he released Guli's hands. Guli said nothing, his heart brimming with shame. General, be at ease. There will not be a next time. On the battlefield, we will prove to Milord whether or not the Karluks are still trustworthy. I hope so. Cheng Qianli, Guli, and the other Karluk leaders quickly left. Wanapelua's death and the 15,000 Karluk warriors in the city had to be dealt with. The only thing Wang Chong could do was dispatch more than 8,000 elite Chishi Protectorate soldiers into the city to intimidate the crowd. In addition, Chen Bin's 3,000 ballista teams were on standby to enter Talas. With the strength of this fully equipped ballista team, the 15,000 Karluks would need only a few seconds to clear the city. If Guli dared to have any other thoughts, he would truly be seeking his own death. Lord Protector General, how are your injuries? After watching Cheng Qianli leave, Wang Chong turned to Gao Xianji and worriedly asked. Gao Xianji was in an extremely poor state. After 2 months of fierce fighting, Gao Xianji's armor was in tatters and his body was covered in wounds. His strength had dropped drastically. When he had attacked Wanhapeluo just now, Wang Chong had sensed that although Gao Xianji was still powerful, he was probably only 60% of his peak strength. This Battle of Talas was extremely important. Of the more than 100,000 people in the Tang dynasty, only Gao Xianji had reached the peak great general level of the Saint Martial realm. Not even Wang Chong could be considered one of them. Gao Xianji's condition was directly related to the outcome of this battle. Fortunately, I can hold on. Abu Muslim probably isn't doing much better than me. Gao Xianji seemed to know what Wang Chong was worried about. An imperial great general like Gao Xianji was one of the strongest existences in the world. The only person who could beat him into such a state and shatter his armor was the Abbasid Caliphate's governor of the East, Abu Muslim. Wang Chong smiled as he took out a brocade box and handed it over. "What is this?" Gao Xianji frowned in confusion. "These are some pills that I obtained from the capital. They can help Lord Protector General recover from his injuries and recover his energy. Milord should take them in a little while." Wang Chong faintly smiled. Gao Xianji glanced at Wang Chong in shock. Wang Chong had made far more preparations for this battle than he had imagined, and they were far more thorough. He had even taken care of such minor details. "Many thanks." After a moment's hesitation, Gao Xianji quickly took the box from Wang Chong's hands, opened it, and took out the largest silver-white pill, which he swallowed. At this sight, Wang Chong inwardly nodded. With a battle imminent, Gao Xianji's recovery was of the utmost importance. Gao Xianji clearly understood this, which was why he was so forthright. Milord fought with Abu Muslim for 2 months. "What is Milord's impression of this Arab commander?" Wang Chong asked. "Cunning, cautious, decisive, and persistent." Gao Xianji didn't even think about it and said 4 words in a row. "Buzz." Wang Chong instantly frowned at Gao Xianji's words. He knew that Gao Xianji had a very high evaluation of Abu Muslim, but Wang Chong had never imagined that someone of Gao Xianji's status would have such a high evaluation. Cunning, cautious, decisive, and persevering. These 4 words blurted out from Gao Xianji's mouth without even thinking. It was obvious that the Arab commander had left a deep impression on Gao Xianji in the last 2 months, which was why he was able to say these 4 words so quickly and without hesitation. These words might be derogatory when used by ordinary people, but when used by the commander of the enemy army, it was an extremely high evaluation. There was no doubt that Abu Muslim was an extremely troublesome and powerful opponent. Wang Chong, when fighting with Abu Muslim, you can't be the slightest bit careless. Otherwise, one wrong step will lead to the next, and you and I both know the final result. Gao Xianji solemnly said to Wang Chong. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen such a serious expression on Gao Xianji's face. "Understood." Wang Chong solemnly nodded, but he quickly broke into a smile. "But no matter how cunning and crafty he is, he won't stand a chance against me. The Arabs truly are very powerful, but alas, they shouldn't have made an enemy of the Tang dynasty." Wang Chong's expression was carefree as he spoke, exuding a persuasive and infectious aura. Wang Chong was not Gao Xianji, much less Fomenlinta. He was the strongest war saint in the history of the Central Plains. No matter how powerful Abu Muslim was, he should never have provoked the Tang dynasty, and certainly not Wang Chong. No matter how cunning and crafty he was just displaying his slight skill before an expert and had no chance of victory. Gao Xianji was at first stunned by Wang Chong's words, but then he smiled. "You're right. He truly shouldn't have made an enemy of the Tang dynasty." One Gao Xianji had kept the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Arabian Empire at Talas for 2 months, and now that Wang Chong had arrived, the number of soldiers defending the city had increased by more than 100,000. Abu Muslim's chances of victory were even lower. Gao Xianji quickly left. The city of Talas still had several thousand wounded soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army. Whether it was the Karluk incident or the Anshi Protectorate Army, he was needed to oversee the situation. As for Wang Chong's side, although his army had not yet entered the city, a large number of cattle, sheep, provisions, and armaments had all been transported into the city. Only the Karluks had been left outside the city by Wang Chong, guarded by the army. Marquis. When Gao Xianji entered the city, all the tranquil West generals had left. No one paid any attention to him, and Xue Qianjun finally moved closer to him. "How did you know that Wanhe Peiluo would attack the Arab emissary the moment he saw him?" If Wanhe Peiluo and Lord Gao Xianji had discovered that the Arab emissary was fake, wouldn't everything have been exposed? Xue Qianjun's voice was very soft, but the information he revealed was astonishing. That hooded Arab emissary that had thrown Wanhe Peiluo into such disarray and caused him to launch a sudden attack was actually a fake. If Wanhe Peiluo knew the truth, he would probably be so angry that he would come back to life. When Xue Qianjun had brought the Arab emissary over, he had appeared calm on the surface, but he was actually sweating on the inside. Others might not know the face of the Arab emissary, but he did. If Wanha Peluo had acted a little later or taken off his hood, in front of Anxi Protector General Gao Xianji and his other generals, the situation would have been extremely awkward. Chapter 895. True and false, false and true. As long as 9 out of 10 pieces of evidence are true, no one cares if the last one is true or false. Wanha Peluo had a guilty conscience and confessed without being pressed. No one cares if the Arab emissary is real or fake. But what if he really did expose it? Although he knew that this question was inappropriate, Xue Qianjun couldn't help but ask. He had endured this question for a long time, and it felt like 100 claws had been clawing at his heart. He had no choice but to spit it out. Then we've really wronged him, Wang Chong indifferently said. Xue Qianjun was dumbstruck, his mouth wide open. Wang Chong grinned, shot a glance at Xue Qianjun, and then left with a wave of his sleeve. Xue Qianjun stood there in a daze, and after a long while he suddenly understood and began to laugh. Wronged? Marquis was just teasing him. Marquis's thoughts are truly hard to guess. As this thought flitted through his mind, Xue Qianjun quickly followed. The night was getting darker, and everything was progressing in an orderly manner. Chong, something's not right. After some time, as Wang Chong was inspecting his surroundings, Wang Chong's father, Wang Yan, and big brother, Wang Fu, suddenly walked out of the army. Wang Yan's brow was tightly furrowed, and he seemed rather uneasy. The Arabs still haven't moved. This truly isn't normal. In this battle, they lost around 80 to 90,000 soldiers, but most of them were infantry, with only 20 to 30% being cavalry. The remaining 200,000 cavalry weren't much affected, and they have the ability to counterattack. He is fully capable of launching a counterattack. It is indeed abnormal for him to remain so calm. Wang Chong's big brother, Wang Fu, also spoke. Wang Fu was dressed in black armor, his posture upright and his bearing imposing. Although he was young, Wang Fu was extremely experienced on the battlefield, and he also possessed an extremely sharp intuition. Wang Chong said nothing, only turned his head and looked past the army. On the horizon, he could see that the Arab cavalry had formed a massive arc, neither too far nor too close, facing off against the Tang dynasty. After capturing Wanha Peluo, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji dealt with the Karluk tribe, and then moved all the supplies into the city. During this entire process, the Arabs showed no signs of movement. They were abnormally calm, showing no signs of an attack. There's always something strange going on. The Arabs have always been fierce and aggressive, seeking revenge for the smallest grievance. Keeping their composure isn't their style. If I'm not wrong, they should be waiting for someone. Wang Chong smirked. With just a glance, he immediately understood. Waiting for someone? Who are we waiting for? Hearing Wang Chong's words, Wang Yan and Wang Fu exchanged glances. They were greatly surprised. The two of them only felt that the Arabs were acting a little strange, but Wang Chong was certain that they were waiting for someone. I don't know, but we'll find out soon enough. Wang Chong shook his head and waved behind him. Zhang Ke, increase the range of patrols. No matter what happens in the surroundings, I want to be the first to know if there's even the slightest disturbance. Your subordinate understands. Zhang Ke's voice came from behind him, and then he left with the clatter of footsteps. As the night deepened, while Wang Chong was leading the Qixi Protectorate in setting up defenses around Talas, to the east of the Tsong Mountains, in the distant western regions, in one of the 4 garrisons of Anxi, the town of Shul, a family was sleeping peacefully in their room. The man of the family slept on the edge of the bed while the mistress slept on the inside. In between them was a child of 3 or 4. The Battle of Talas had gathered hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the empires of the East and West, and the atmosphere was fraught with tension. The dangerous aura exuded by the battle had rendered the once bustling 4 garrisons of Anxi almost empty. Not many people could stay behind at this time, and those who stayed had their own reasons for not being able to leave. Buzz. All of a sudden, the bed shook twice. The man frowned in his daze and subconsciously called out, "Suha, don't move around." The child clawed at the air a few times and then clung to the mistress, replying in a daze, "I didn't." The room fell silent, but the bed shook once more, even more violently than before. This time, even the mistress was somewhat angry. "Suha, don't be naughty. Don't move around while you're sleeping." "Pa, it really wasn't me." The child felt wronged. As the child spoke, the bed shook once more, and this time, even the mistress and mistress noticed that something was wrong. A naughty child would never be this powerful. "What's going on? Is it an earthquake?" The mistress sleeping in the inner room was somewhat afraid. At this moment, the long neigh of a horse could be heard in the darkness. The man's expression changed. He quickly raised a finger and shushed her. The room instantly quietened down. The mistress seemed to sense something and hugged the child as she shrank into a corner, her body shivering and not daring to move. Rumble. In just a few moments, the ground began to shake even more violently. At first, it was like a sieve, but later, the entire room began to shake. Amidst the trembling, there was also the sound of horse hooves. The sound was as heavy as thunder, echoing in the night sky. The man trembled and hesitated for a moment. Then he gathered his courage and walked to the window. He quietly opened the window, revealing a sliver of space. With just a glance, his face instantly paled as if he had been dealt a heavy blow, and he hastily pulled back. "Nay." At this moment, the snoring of a warhorse came from outside the window, and a faint light shone through the window. A moment later, the shadow of a massive warhorse was projected from outside and landed on the window. As the family of three looked on in panic, a somewhat hoarse voice came from outside. "Sueya isn't far ahead, and the Anshi Protectorate headquarters is there." Gao Xianji went to Talas with 90% of his soldiers, leaving behind Feng Changqing and several thousand soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate army. "Should we go over and exterminate them along the way?" The hoarse voice said in the flickering light of the fire. "There's no need. Dewusili is coming from the east, and the Turkic army he's leading is coming from Kucha, so it's closer. I'll leave Feng Changqing and the Anshi Protectorate army left behind to him." After a few moments of silence, another voice replied, this one extremely refined and scholarly. "I'm worried about the Arabs right now. There are more than 300,000 Arab soldiers outside Talas, and the Arabs have always been vicious, even more belligerent than us. I originally believed that the Arabs had the advantage in numbers and could easily deal with the hundreds of thousands of foreign and Han soldiers of the Chishi Protectorate. I didn't think that they would win." At this moment, another loud and clear voice rang out. The hooves of a warhorse clattered as a tall and sturdy warhorse walked up from behind. Its shadow was projected outside the window. In the room, the family of three held their breaths, huddled together and shivering in fear, too frightened to speak. Relax. Abu Muslim won't lose that easily. How could someone who could become the governor of the east of the Arabian Empire lose so easily? Moreover, the Arab main force still exists. This battle is far from over. The scholarly voice confidently said. In addition, I've already received Abu Muslim's reply. He's already prepared. Once we arrive, the three sides will work together to exterminate the Tang dynasty's army. Talas is not the southwest, and Abu Muslim is not Jelifeng. In this battle, neither the Anshi Protectorate army nor the Chishi Protectorate will have any chance of survival. If the Tang people can still survive, then he really can be called the war saint. Outside the window, there was a sudden silence. The other two figures did not speak, but they both nodded. Speed is of the essence in war. Our greatest advantage is that neither the Chishi Protectorate nor he knows that we've already set off. Their attention has been drawn away by the Arabs. As long as we can fool their eyes and ears, we can launch a surprise attack that will catch them off guard. The first hoarse voice spoke, a hint of anticipation in its voice. But don't get too careless. The Chishi Protectorate has an eagle team. Every time we go on a campaign, these eagles will scout and patrol the perimeter. Although we've been traveling at night and hiding during the day, if we can't fool the eyes and ears of the eagles, we'll still fall short. We won't be able to sneak up on him. The third voice boomed. It's just a few birds. There's no need to worry too much. I've taken care of everything. He won't have a chance to discover us. The scholarly voice in the middle confidently said. Hiya. With the last word, the three of them urged their horses and galloped away. In the room, the family of three breathed sighs of relief as if they had just escaped from death. While everyone's attention was focused on the battle at Talas, tens of thousands of warhorses were surging through the darkness from these two places. One of these two factions had entered Sueye while the other had taken a detour around Sueye, traveling through an even more concealed path. Under the stars and the moon, they crossed the Tsong Mountains with astonishing speed toward Talas. Hong long long, the earth trembled, yellow sand filled the sky, and smoke and dust soared into the sky under the stars and moon. Thousands of warhorses were galloping through the dust. Although the sky was still dark, it was getting closer and closer to daybreak. Prime Minister, Whitestone Ridge isn't far up ahead. It's only 50 to 60 li from Talas. The hooves of the warhorse were as heavy as thunder. A strong warhorse galloped against the army and stopped in front of a tall and slender figure with a respectful expression. In front of him, three tall figures stood side by side. The slender figure in the middle was dressed in a scholarly robe and had a graceful bearing. However, the most impressive thing about him was his long and narrow eyes, which radiated a brilliant light and revealed infinite wisdom and sharpness, as if he could see through all the secrets of the world. If one looked carefully, this was the Daluan Ruozen who had walked out of the prison of the Uzun royal capital, washed clean of all impurities. Now that Daluan Ruozen had taken off his prisoner's clothes and put on his scholarly robe once more, he lost some of the elegance and handsomeness of the Daluan Ruozen of the southwest and gained the firmness and composure of someone who had survived a storm. Next to his saddle was a white cloth bag, the handle of a white fan poking out of it. The fan was rather old, but from its shape, it was the feather fan that he always carried with him. From the moment he entered the prison, Daluan Ruozen had put away this feather fan and replaced it with an azure sword. Buzz. Daluan Ruozen made a gesture with his hand, and the army immediately stopped. To his left and right, Huoshu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoj focused their gazes on Daluan Ruozen. Bring the map. Chapter 896. Without the slightest hesitation, Daluan Ruozen unfurled the rolled-up map. Uzun horseman walked over with a torch in his hand. The bright light of the torch illuminated the map, revealing countless ravines and ravines. The entire western regions, the Uzun Plateau, the western Turkic Khaganate, the majestic Tsong Mountains to the west of Sueye, and the distant city of Talas. Map of the continent. At the top of the map were these words written in the Uzun language. This was a detailed map that outlined all the factions around the western regions, and all the details were extremely detailed. Such a map was priceless, and not even Wang Chong had one. Wang Chong had once spent several months trying to draw up such a map, but in the end he had only been able to produce a rough sand table of Talas. He had not been able to draw out a larger region. But in Daluan Ruozen's hands, not only Talas, but even the distant Arabian Empire was faintly visible on the map, all the proportions and details so perfect that it was astonishing. Even the secret passageway beside Sueye City was revealed on top of it. If Wang Chong were to see this map, he would assuredly be stunned. This was precisely the kind of map that he had strived for. This was a map of the entire continent. The Uzun had spent 100 years fighting against the various factions of the western regions before finally completing it. Unlike the Tang dynasty, the western regions had always been the sphere of influence of the Uzun Empire, which was why they had been able to draw up a map of the continent. In the entire world, there was only one such detailed map of the continent. Talas. Daluan Ruozen lowered his head, his eyes bright and intelligent. With a single sweep, he locked onto a protruding mark on the map. 53 li is the limit of the Tang dynasty's patrols. The Tang dynasty's Eagle team should have appeared. It's about time. Yes, Prime Minister. Just as Daluan Ruozen's voice fell, a voice rang out from the shadows behind Daluan Ruozen. Da-da-da, the sound of the horse's hooves was as heavy as thunder. With the light from the torches, a fully armored general could be seen galloping away. In the dark of the night, it was impossible to see his appearance clearly. They could only see him charging towards the back of the army and quickly disappearing. In the darkness, Huoshu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj glanced at each other, seeing the confusion in each other's eyes, but neither of them asked any questions. Time passed slowly, and the surroundings were quiet. Suddenly, boom, the sound of metal clanking came from the end of the group. Nothing could be seen in the darkness, but one after another, something seemed to be flying out of some kind of metal cage. The sound lasted for a very long time, and it was accompanied by some kind of rapid airflow. No one knew what was going on, and even Huoshu Wuzong, who was closest to Daluan Ruozhen, was confused. Although the vast majority of Daluan Ruozhen's operations were carried out through him, not all of them were like this. In the several months that Daluan Ruozhen had spent in the prison, he had met many people. Not even Huoshu Wuzong knew what he had discussed with them or what he had ordered them to do. Just when everyone's doubts were at their deepest, the strange cry of an infant came from the sky. This cry was extremely strange, seeming like a cry that wasn't, seeming like a cry that wasn't. It gave everyone a fright. Look over there. Suddenly, someone in the group raised his uzun to the sky and pointed at a certain place as he shouted. Huoshu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj subconsciously raised their heads. A bright moon hung high in the sky, cleansing the darkness around it. The moment the pair raised their heads, they saw that a massive black shadow had spread its wings and was flying through the moon. Even though it was very far away, the pair of Dusong Mengpoj and Dusong Mengpoj recognized it at a glance: vultures. These were vultures that could not be more commonly seen on the Uzun Plateau. When the Uzun performed sky burials, they were either buried or burned. Instead, they were fed to the most vicious birds of the plateau, the vultures, and they viewed this as a supreme honor. Although vultures were extremely common on the Uzun Plateau, vultures were not commonly seen to the west of the Tsong Mountains. A hint of surprise flitted through the eyes of both Huoshu Huaitsong and Dusong Mengpoj when they saw this vulture flying through the moonlight. But this surprise did not last long before it was replaced by extreme shock. The cries of vultures came from the depths of the darkness, and right after the first vulture, a dense flapping of wings could be heard. As Dusong Mengpoj, Huoshu Huaitsong, and the thousands of Tibetan cavalry watched, whoosh! A flock of vultures flew through the sky like a dark cloud, so dense that they even blotted out the bright moon. In a flash, the stars and moon dimmed, plunging the world into darkness. In that instant, countless soldiers and horses disappeared into the darkness along with their armors. Silence. The surroundings were filled with silence. Many pairs of eyes were staring at the flock of vultures in the sky, and none of them could say a word. Even Huoshu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj, two Uzun great generals, were dumbfounded. The Uzun Empire had never placed much importance on its aerial forces. All of the empire's resources had been devoted to the training of cavalry. The pair had never imagined that Daluan Ruozhen, in his prison cell, had managed to secretly train such a massive army of vultures behind their backs. A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Haven't any of you sensed it yet at the Battle of the Triangular Gap? The aerial army is playing an increasingly important role in this era. At the very least, it's playing an increasingly important role in that person's hands. If we can't defeat him, the best method is to imitate him. Daluan Ruozhen's indifferent and calm voice came from the darkness. Let's go. With these final words, Daluan Ruozhen squeezed his horse's belly and took the lead to leap out from between the two. Move out. With Daluan Ruozhen's order, the thousands of Uzun cavalry once more galloped toward the city of Talas under the cover of the vultures. Several li passed in the blink of an eye, only a few moments later. Cree. In the distance, a rock eagle was patrolling back and forth, drawing a huge arc in the sky. The dense army of steel on the horizon suddenly cried out and was just about to turn and leave. All of a sudden, a croak could be heard, like the cry of an infant. Before the rock eagle could fly back to transmit the signal, a swarm of countless vultures began to descend from the sky, pouncing madly on the rock eagle from all directions. With a sharp cry, the rock eagle was torn to shreds, its black feathers scattering down from the sky. "Let's go!" Below the rock eagle, an Uzun commander stood in the darkness, his eyes bright. Without even looking at the sky, he waved his hand, and the thousands of Uzun cavalry immediately charged through the area where the rock eagles were patrolling. In the sky, the flock of vultures screeched and continued to fly forward like a flowing black ribbon. Cree. Several li later, the second defense line appeared. 2 rock eagles flew back and forth in the sky. The vultures swooped down, once more tearing this outer defense line to shreds. A third, a fourth, in just 10-some li, they encountered at least 7 or 8 defense lines laid down by the Tang dynasty. There were not many at each defense line, often only 1 or 2 or 3. Although there were not many of them, the rock eagles could not fly too low. At the same time, they could clearly see what was going on around them. They had clearly been meticulously calculated. Huoshu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj had originally believed that they had the advantage of being late and had not been noticed by the Tang people. But as they encountered one defense line after another, they couldn't help but feel their hearts sink. Did you sense it? This is his style, cautious and cautious. He won't give you the slightest chance. The slightest clue will immediately be noticed. In a battle with him, we must use all our strength and not be the slightest bit careless. As if knowing what the pair were thinking, Daluan Ruozen's voice rang out in their ears. His voice was extremely calm, suffused with a calming strength. He's too careful. With these defenses, it'll be very difficult for us to smoothly pass through without being noticed. Huoshu Wuzong worriedly said. That's right. He's laid down too many defense lines. Dusong Mengpoj agreed, a similar concern in his eyes. It was very difficult to believe that the fellow they had to deal with had been an insignificant youth in the War of the Southwest. But after this battle, he had completely changed. Even though they had yet to see that youth, the meticulously calculated distribution of birds made even a great general like Huoshu Wuzong feel a sliver of pressure. The Tang people were too powerful. It was said that the Tang dynasty had been peaceful for several decades, that the morale of the people had waned, and that their fighting power was no longer what it had been. But Uzun had suffered defeat after defeat at the hands of the Tang dynasty when its soldiers were at their strongest. And this was when they had the absolute advantage in numbers. The current Uzun had been suppressed to the very limit by the Tang dynasty. And that person's existence made all of Uzun restless. Even on the plateau, they found it hard to rest easy. This was also why they had mobilized their soldiers. There's no need to worry too much. Everyone has a weakness, and he is no exception. Daluan Ruozen's indifferent voice rang out in their ears. In addition, I've already figured out the pattern of his bird defenses. Buzz! Huoshu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj trembled at these words, their sharp eyes shining with shock as they reined in their horses. Chapter 897. Buzz! With a wave of his sleeve, Daluan Ruozen sent stellar energy out of his body, causing the map in his hand to float in the air. As everyone watched, Daluan Ruozen extended a palm and placed it over the map. As his 5 fingers moved, the radiance of the stars fell through the gaps between his fingers and onto the map. In the blink of an eye, the light and shadow on the map of the continent changed, and suddenly, countless dots of light appeared. These dots of light followed a certain pattern, accurately appearing on the map of the continent, above the mountains, hills, and plains, all the way to Talas. Dusong Mengpoj and the surrounding Uzun generals couldn't help but grimace at this sight. Only Huoshu Wuzong remained indifferent. Daluan Ruozen was not an expert of the great general level, and the prime ministers of the empire needed to spend a great deal of time handling government affairs, so the majority of them were not very skilled in martial arts. But this did not mean that their martial arts were very poor. Daluan Ruozen's control over stellar energy was no weaker than Huoshu Wuzong's. Do you see it clearly? This is where the Tang people are defending. Take the vulture army and exterminate them one by one. Daluan Ruozen calmly said, his voice suffused with formidable confidence. Yes, Prime Minister. A series of respectful voices came from his ear as 5 or 6 Tibetan officers carefully examined the points of light on the map and then flew off. Caw! Amidst the deafening cries, Countless vultures covered the sky and covered the earth as they rapidly flew forward. Dusong Mengpoj slightly creased his brow as he looked at the dots of light on the map, a look of confusion in his eyes. Let's go. This is your first time working with a prime minister. You'll understand after some time. Huoshu Huizong patted Dusong Mengpoj's shoulder with a broad palm and grinned as he urged his horse forward. In a daze, Dusong Mengpoj turned his head and realized that at some point, Daluan Ruozhen had put away the map of the continent and was galloping away on his horse, leaving only his back to Dusong Mengpoj. It's really hard to guess. Dusong Mengpoj looked up at the sky and gave a long sigh, but his mind was relaxed. Daluan Ruozhen, who had just walked out of the capital's dungeon, was erratic and unpredictable, like a heavenly steed soaring through the sky, completely unfathomable. Dusong Mengpoj had never worked with Daluan Ruozhen before, but this was a blessing, not a curse, for the entire Uzun. As for whether Daluan Ruozhen's excellent judgment was right or wrong, they would soon find out. Flocks of vultures flew through the darkness like ghosts, and on the ground, the Uzun commanders faithfully carried out Daluan Ruozhen's plan. Flocks of vultures swooped towards the spots marked on the map of the continent. Ear-piercing screeches rang out as rock eagles fell from the sky one after another, feathers flying in all directions. These rock eagles didn't even have a chance to escape before they were killed one by the flock of vultures. 1, 2, 3, 4. In the sky, the flock of vultures opened a path while the tens of thousands of Uzun cavalry rapidly advanced. The tens of thousands of Uzun soldiers were advancing with astonishing speed toward the city of Talas. 40 li, 37 li, 30 li, 25 li. The Uzun army was getting closer and closer to Talas. Daluan Ruozhen's plan was working, and even now, the Tang people had been completely unaware of it. Most astonishing of all was that Daluan Ruozhen's judgment was meticulous and flawless. The Tang people had completely predicted the location of their defenses. This time, even Dusong Mengpoj could sense that Daluan Ruozhen had truly found their weakness and accurately deduced all their plans. If this continues, we really will be able to launch a night raid on the Tang people, and we won't give them any chance to react. Dusong Mengpoj quietly said to himself. In all his years of campaigning with the Tang dynasty, Dusong Mengpoj had never felt that things had gone so smoothly. Unlike in the past, he was completely confident that the Tang people would not respond. 25 li was truly astonishing at such a close distance. There's still an hour. There's plenty of time before daybreak. There's still 10 li. As long as we can smoothly break through their defenses without being discovered, we can catch them off guard. Daluan Ruozhen sat on his mighty Uzun steed, looking up at the eastern sky, his eyes flashing as he rapidly calculated. Daybreak was getting closer and closer, but even so, the Uzun army still had a chance. Daybreak was the time when people tended to relax the most. As long as they could fool the eyes and ears of the Tang people and launch a surprise attack at that moment, they could still deal a heavy blow to the Tang people. Pass on my order. All soldiers dismount and wrap their hooves. Abandon the supply wagons in the rear and advance at full speed. Daluan Ruozhen ordered with a wave of his hand. Yes, Prime Minister. A few moments later, the army was back on the road, moving even faster than before. 24 li. 23 li. A flock of vultures swooped down, sweeping up 5 or 6 rock eagles patrolling in the sky. The scouts on the ground didn't even have time to send out a message before they were swarmed by hundreds of Uzun scouts and killed. 22 li, 21 li. The defensive line the Tang people had set up was getting denser and denser, and the number of scouts was also increasing. But all of them were wiped out by Daluan Ruozhen with thunderous momentum. At this moment, the thousands of Uzun cavalry and the 2 Uzun great generals, Huoshu Huizong and Dusong Mengpoj, all appeared nervous. Even though Daluan Ruozhen said nothing, his body was leaning forward on the back of his horse. His tense body and focused eyes indicated that his mind was stretched to its limit. 20 li, 18 li. They were getting closer and closer. There were still several li left. As long as the Tang people didn't discover them, the Uzun army would be able to launch a successful sneak attack. Hurry! A nervous voice came out of the darkness. The moment a group of rock eagles appeared in the sky, an Uzun general on the ground immediately sent out a signal. This time, the rock eagles in the sky seemed even more vigilant than the previous ones. With a sharp cry, 5 or 6 of them scattered in every direction. In that instant, everyone on the ground felt as if their hearts were in their throats. Everyone's eyes were filled with nervousness. The vultures in the sky swooped down, howling as they charged at the fleeing rock eagles. The battle swiftly unfolded. According to Prime Minister's plans, this was the Tang people's last defensive line within 10 li of Talas. If they could break through this defensive line, they would only be 15 li from Talas. As long as they could silently get within 15 li of the Tang people, they would be able to launch a perfect sneak attack on the Tang people. Buzz. All the Uzun generals looked up at the sky, nervous expressions on their faces. They won't be able to escape. Daluan Ruozan looked up at the sky, his expression calm, but it exuded a powerful self-confidence. He had spent countless hours preparing for today's battle, and he had personally planned all the vulture tactics. None of the birds would have a chance to escape. As for the Tang dynasty scouts on the ground, he had already dispatched soldiers to exterminate them. This elite force had been trained by Huoshu Wizang in the prison, and he had obtained the full cooperation of all the generals of the Uzun King districts. Each scout had been carefully selected and trained to hunt down and kill the Tang people's scouts. All of them were capable of fighting 1 against 10. The fact that the Tang people had still not sent out a signal meant that the Tang people's scouts had succeeded. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Daluan Ruozan looked up at the sky, constantly counting. As if by magic, with each number Daluan Ruozan counted, a rock eagle would fall from the sky, surrounded and attacked by the vultures. As Daluan Ruozan counted down to 5, whoosh! An arrow shot out from behind him. Dusong Mengpoj, seated on his handsome steed of the Great Snow Mountain, had drawn his bow and shot down the last rock eagle. Success! The sight of the last rock eagle plummeting from the sky caused a cheer to rise from the ground. The Uzun generals looked up at the sky and clenched their fists. They had finally succeeded. They had broken through so many of the Tang people's defenses, and now they had finally broken through the last one. Now, the Uzun only needed to charge in and wipe out their shame, deal the Tang people an unprecedented blow, and then work with the Arabs to destroy the Tang dynasty's Anxi and Qixi protectorate, forever altering the map of the western regions. All was quiet, with only the light of the moon and stars in the sky and the sound of the wind. Daluan Ruozan carefully listened to his surroundings. Finally, he gave a satisfied nod and gave a long sigh. When fighting with Wang Chong, one could not be the slightest bit careless. From the moment they had set out from the Uzun Plateau until now, he had finally turned the tables and won a true victory. As long as he grasped the initiative, it would be his turn to strike. In the first round, the Uzun and the Tang dynasty had finally won. Move out! As he watched his highland steed exhale an icy white breath, Daluan Ruozan waved his hand and gave the order to move out. Rumble! The thousands of Uzun soldiers exploded with killing intent, and like a thawing river of ice, they charged into the distance. Kiki! However, at this moment, a sharp cry suddenly came from the night sky. This cry was so sharp that it would have been impossible to notice unless one was paying close attention. But when this cry fell into Daluan Ruozan's ears, the calm and composed Daluan Ruozan instantly shuddered as if he had been struck by lightning. Buzz! In a flash, Daluan Ruozan raised his head and looked in the direction of that sharp cry. Over the thousands of war horses, over the mountains, Daluan Ruozan could clearly see a tiny sparrow take off from the branches of a mountain and fly into the distance. Chapter 898. Oh no! This was the only thought that remained in Daluan Ruozan's mind as he watched the fleeing sparrow. Although sparrows were common in the western regions, they were extremely rare in the barren, rocky, and barren lands west of the Tsong Mountains because there was nothing for sparrows to hunt for. Moreover, the weather was getting colder, and sparrows would never appear in a place like this in this season. Twang! In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, there was a loud sound. The bowstring trembled, and a long arrow shot out from behind. Although it was shot later, it arrived first. The arrow pierced through the sparrow, and the huge force caused the sparrow's corpse to fall to the ground. But Daluin Ruozen's expression did not change at all because of the fall of the sparrow. At the end of his vision, he could see a small black silhouette vanishing into the distance. It was a gray-brown sparrow hawk. As the vultures hunted down the 5 rock eagles, everyone's attention was focused on the sky. It was also at this moment that the grayish-brown sparrow hawk soared into the sky from a distant tree branch and rapidly tore through the air. Its speed was extremely fast. In just a short while, it had already flown out of sight. Even the archers could not reach it, let alone the vultures in the sky. I miscalculated. Daluin Ruozen closed his eyes and gave a deep sigh, the hands hidden in his sleeves trembling. From start to finish, he and Wang Chong had been winning this invisible contest. The tens of thousands of Uzun soldiers were already 18 li from Talas, but Wang Chong had shown no reaction. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to succeed, he had fallen prey to one of the sparrows that Wang Chong had hidden in the tree. When patrolling, all flying birds were in the air. The higher they flew, the more they could see. Thus, no one would place scouting birds on the ground or on a tree. Daluin Ruozen had accurately determined where Wang Chong had set up his defenses, but he had not expected to lose here. "Prime Minister, what do we do?" Everyone seemed to sense something, and they all turned to Daluin Ruozen. Even Hushu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch paled. Something unexpected happened. A sparrow hawk had completely disrupted everyone's plans. It was too late to stop it. Whether Wang Chong was prepared or not was a completely different matter to them. There was no question that the moment that sparrow hawk flew out, they had been exposed. The mood instantly turned grave. "Prime Minister, should we change the plan? Should we continue forward?" Hushu Wuzong probed. Daluin Ruozen said nothing, but his eyes were constantly shifting, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. After what seemed like a second, but also like countless eons, Daluin Ruozen suddenly smiled and shook his head. As expected of the person I know. If he really did not know anything and allowed us to sneak all the way to the city of Talas, I would actually feel a little uneasy. But now is the true battle between us. Since we've been discovered, there's no need to hide it. Unfurl the banners and remove the cloth wrapping the hoofs. We will openly march into Talas. Yes, Prime Minister. Rumble. This time, the Uzun army no longer concealed itself. Tens of thousands of soldiers stirred up a cloud of dust as they galloped toward the city of Talas. It's bad. At the same time, outside the distant city of Talas, Zhang Ke rushed in a panic to Wang Chong's position. "What's wrong?" Wang Chong, his father Wang Yan, his big brother Wang Fu, the invincible great general Li Sai, and the king of Gonka were observing the Arabs. When he saw Zhang Ke's expression, he turned his head and slightly frowned. "Marquis, something big has happened. An army of tens of thousands of soldiers has appeared behind us. They're moving with incredible speed, and all the scouts I set up along the way, as well as the birds in the sky, have been eliminated by them. They've already gotten close to Talas and are less than 10 li from us." Zhang Ke kneeled on the ground, his face ghastly pale. "What?" Next to Wang Chong, Wang Yan, Wang Fu, Li Sai, and the king of Gonka trembled in shock, all of them grimacing. All of them had been discussing a strategy to deal with the Arabs, but now, they had fallen deathly silent. To the east of the city of Talas, across a plain, more than 200,000 elite Arab soldiers and Abu Muslim, the Arab governor of the east, were eyeing them like a tiger watching its prey. While all of them were focused on the Arabs, the sudden appearance of an army of tens of thousands in the rear was extremely fatal. The Tang dynasty was now under attack from both the front and the rear. This was a major taboo in leading an army. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, and the atmosphere instantly became tense. Zhang Ke kneeled on the ground, beads of sweat oozing out of his forehead, drenching his robes. Keeping watch on the perimeter, discovering enemy forces ahead of time, and scouting out enemy forces, this was Zhang Ke's duty in the army. But tens of thousands of enemy soldiers had advanced without him noticing at all, even allowing them to get so close. This was a massive dereliction of duty. This was an enemy army of tens of thousands. The enemy had stealthily approached and attacked his scouts and flying birds. Their hostility was obvious. If his own mistake resulted in his army being attacked, Zhang Ke would never be able to forgive himself. What's going on here? Where did these enemies come from? How could the entire western regions have so many soldiers? Wang Yan was the first to speak. Upon receiving Zhang Ke's report, Wang Yan's first reaction was that this was impossible. Wang Chong had only just arrived at the city of Talas a day ago, so how could an army of tens of thousands suddenly appear in the rear? And there had been no warning at all? This was too sudden. Zhang Ke, are you sure? Wang Yan stared at Zhang Quebec. Seeing Zhang Ke nod, Wang Yan's expression instantly turned grim. The expressions of the other generals also darkened. How could this be? Did the Arabs bribe the other kingdoms of the western regions? Wang Fu muttered, and his expression became extremely solemn. If this was a one-on-one battle, Wang Fu wouldn't have cared. But now, there was a wolf in front and a tiger in the back. The entire Qixi army had fallen into an unprecedented passive and disadvantageous position. The Battle of Talas was of utmost importance. The outcome of this battle would directly affect Anxi, Longxi, and the Anxi of the capital. The Tang dynasty simply could not afford to lose. Impossible. Wang Fu had barely spoken when the king of Ganka rejected the idea. The western regions are all small countries that can't gather an army of tens of thousands. Moreover, it's still uncertain who will win the war between the Tang dynasty and Arabia. The kingdoms of the western regions will not, nor do they have the courage to, intervene at a time like this. A war between elephants and lions is not something they can participate in. Elephants and lions was the impression all the kingdoms of the western regions had of this war between the Tang dynasty and Arabia. Anyone who was swept up in this war would be crushed into powder. The wisest course of action was to stay out of the way, and this was what the kingdoms of the western regions were doing. The king of Ganka did not believe that any of the small countries of the western regions would seek their own destruction at a time like this. But we've already cleaned out the soldiers of Uzun's northern border. There are no more soldiers to send, and the black wolf Yabgua Gudulan was killed by Marquis. All the soldiers on the border have also been cleaned up. If it's not the kingdoms of the western regions, who else could it be? What other faction could gather an army of tens of thousands at a time like this? Li Sai spoke up as well, and his expression was equally solemn. The two largest armies in the vicinity of the western regions were Arabia and the Tang dynasty. It was simply impossible for a third faction to appear out of thin air. The strangest thing was that the tens of thousands of soldiers on the other side were only 10 li from Talas and could arrive at any moment. But even now, no one knew who these people were, not even the origins of this faction. This sort of situation had never happened before. Everyone turned to look at Wang Chong. Wang Chong said nothing, his fingers lightly tapping as if he was thinking about something. A few moments later, Wang Chong finally opened his eyes. There's no need to think about it. It must be Uzun and the Western Turkic Khaganate. Everyone was flabbergasted by Wang Chong's words. In all of the western regions, only Uzun and the Western Turkic Khaganate are worthy of waiting for Abu Muslim and his hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers. Wang Chong indifferently said as he gazed at the vast sea of Arab soldiers. Wang Chong's voice was neither loud nor soft, but his deep eyes exuded a powerful conviction. For a moment, everyone was silent as they stared at Wang Chong, speechless. But Marquis, didn't we just sign a truce with the Western Turks? Li Sai said in shock. Agreements have always been made to be torn up. We signed so many agreements with Uzun, but didn't Uzun still tear them up? Wang Chong calmly said. At this critical moment, he was the only one who could maintain his composure. In the Battle of Talas, the Tang dynasty and Arabia mobilized all their forces, emptying Qixi and Anxi of their forces. It seems like Uzun and the Western Turks saw a chance and moved out. Zhang Ke, scout again. Yes, Marquis. Zhang Ke's expression was grave, and without a word, he immediately flew off. Zhang Ke left quickly, but he returned even faster. It only took a few moments for him to return with a report. Reporting to Marquis, There are more than 70,000 soldiers in the rear, all of them Uzun cavalry. Moreover, the enemy isn't even trying to conceal themselves. They are flying the banner of Uzun. Zhang Kei's face was pale, his voice trembling. Everything was as Wang Chong had predicted, and the surrounding officers all grimaced. The Uzun and the Western Turks had actually moved out at this moment. They were now in an extremely disadvantageous position. But Zhang Kei had not even finished speaking. Marquis, besides the Uzun war banner, we've also discovered a black Uzun war banner with white yak hair in the Uzun army. Zhang Kei raised his head and stealthily sized up Wang Chong as he hesitantly said, "Buzz." The Ganka king had no reaction to these words, but Wang Yan, Wang Fu, Li Sai, and the others all trembled and turned to Jean Quebec. At this moment, even Wang Chong couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. There was only one place in the Uzun Empire that worshipped the white yak and used it as its war banner. The Ngari royal lineage. Chapter 899. What's going on here? Wasn't the Ngari royal lineage wiped out by us? How could there still be a white yak flag with a black background? A voice muttered from the side, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Chen Bin had personally experienced the War of the Southwest. That battle had been so bitter that the Annam Protectorate had almost been completely wiped out. In the end, it had been Wang Chong who had turned the tide and routed the Mengshi, Yusang army. Daluan Ruozhen had returned to the plateau with less than 10,000 cavalry, and Wang Chong's plague had wiped out all of the cattle and sheep of the Ngari royal lineage, turning it into a land of famine and almost deserted. Daluan Ruozhen had disappeared without a trace, and the Ngari royal lineage only existed in name. The white yak and black Uzun war banner had also vanished. No one had expected to see the war banner of the Ngari royal lineage at a time like this. In a flash, everyone turned to Wang Chong. "It's him." No wonder. Wang Chong narrowed his eyes and mentally muttered to himself. Although he had not personally participated in Zhang Kei's patrol area, he had been the one who had given the general direction. To be able to silently remove all the spies and ears in the periphery and break into the range of 10 miles, this was definitely not something that an ordinary person could do. But if this person was Daluan Ruozhen, then everything could be explained. Wang Chong had never imagined that he would appear at the Battle of Talas. This was something that had never happened in his last life. There was no doubt that this was yet another domino effect that he had triggered. Is it for revenge? Wang Chong closed his eyes, his mind in turmoil. Although he couldn't see anything, Wang Chong could sense that behind Talas, a figure was leading thousands of cavalry from the western regions. A fire blazed in his chest, just like himself. The time had changed, the location had changed, but he and Daluan Ruozhen had once more met, and at the most crucial moment of the Battle of Talas. Wang Chong was certain that this timing had been meticulously calculated by the general of the Ngari royal lineage. Even so, Wang Chong was fearless. "Report. Marquis, we've spotted enemy troops behind us. They're less than 8 li away." Just as Wang Chong was thinking to himself, a cloud of dust rose as another scout rode over on a warhorse, looking extremely nervous. "Buzz." As soon as the scout finished speaking, the atmosphere immediately became more and more tense. This time, it was not just Wang Chong and the others who sensed the abnormality. Even the other armies felt somewhat uneasy. With the speed of the cavalry, the distance of 8 miles was covered in the blink of an eye. There was not much time left. They had to make a decision as soon as possible. "Marquis, look." At this moment, the armored Kong Xian, standing next to Li Sai, suddenly turned to the front and pointed at the Arab army. Everyone turned their heads and saw that the Arab army had raised black war banners in the first rays of dawn. More than 200,000 elite Arab cavalry were like an endless flood of black steel slowly surging toward the city of Talas. This sudden movement attracted everyone's attention, and many Anshi Protectorate army soldiers began to appear on the walls of Talas. With the Arabian soldiers in front and the Uzun cavalry led by Daluan Ruozhen in the rear, the more than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements were instantly caught in a pincer attack. Not only that, the Arabs were clearly trying to restrain Wang Chong's Chishi reinforcements, creating an opportunity for the Uzun army in the rear. Rumble. While everyone was staring at the Arab army in the rear of the battlefield, a cloud of dust was rising into the heavens, and a faint tremor could be felt from the earth beneath their feet. The Uzun army was advancing faster than they had imagined. In just a few moments, they were about to reach the city of Talas. "Milord." Everyone sensed the intense danger, and they all turned to Wang Chong, the mood extremely tense. The current situation was as perilous as an egg. Wang Chong had to make a decision as quickly as possible. If the Arabs and Uzun attacked from the front and rear, the more than 100,000 Tang soldiers would be completely wiped out, all their efforts for naught. Rumble. The trembling intensified, and in just a few moments, the Uzun army had advanced once more, getting closer and closer to the city of Talas. Everyone had nervous expressions on their faces. "Milord, time is of the essence. Should we enter the city?" At this moment, a tall and somewhat elderly figure behind Wang Chong's older brother, Wang Fu, broke the silence. It was none other than Chen Shusun, an old subordinate of the Wang clan. Chen Shusun had followed Wang Chong's father for many years, and later on he had been sent by Wang Yan to protect Wang Fu. He had a very deep relationship with all three generations of the Wang clan. In the War of the Southwest, he had fought side by side with Wang Chong and had always addressed Wang Chong as young master. But now that Wang Chong was Qixi Protector General, Chen Shusun addressed Wang Chong as milord. "The city of Talas can hold hundreds of thousands of people. If we retreat into the city now, we can avoid being attacked from both sides. There's still time." The Qixi reinforcements didn't have many choices. They could either stay where they were and be attacked from both sides, or they could retreat into the city and use the sturdiness of the city of Talas to resist the combined army of Arabs and Uzun. Although the gates of Talas had been on the verge of destruction, the craftsmen that Wang Chong had brought had completely repaired them and even strengthened them, making them even sturdier than before. If they wanted to retreat into the city, this was the best opportunity. As a matter of fact, this was the best choice for all of them. Wang Chong said nothing, only slightly raised his head and slowly closed his eyes. The quaking of the earth intensified as Daluan Ruozen's army got closer and closer to Talas, and the dark cloud over the more than 100,000 soldiers of Qixi only thickened. Everyone around Wang Chong was holding their breath, waiting for Wang Chong's final decision. Even Wang Yan was the same. Whether it was in the War of the Southwest, the Battle of the Triangular Gap, or the battle with the Black Wolf Yabgu, Wang Chong had amply proven his abilities and won everyone's trust. Whether they fought or stayed, if there was one person who could win everyone's trust, it was Wang Chong. Rumble. Dust churned in the distance as massive tremors shook the entire battlefield. Daluan Ruozen's army could appear at any moment. In the rear, the black tide of Arab soldiers was advancing faster and faster, each clattering of hooves seemingly stomping on the hearts of the Qixi Protectorate soldiers. Time was fleeting. Whether they stayed or left, fought or retreated, Wang Chong had to make a decision as quickly as possible. At this moment, the lives of the more than 100,000 Qixi reinforcements were in Wang Chong's hands. Boom! There was a metallic clattering as the nearby gates of the city of Talas opened. A group of Anxi Protectorate Army officers appeared, anxiously marching toward Wang Chong. Leading them was the Vice Protector General of the Anxi Protectorate Army, Cheng Qianli. His lips trembled as if he was about to say something to Wang Chong. Almost at the same time, in the distance, the neighing of war horses could be heard. Billowing smoke and dust rose into the air from the distant hills. Although nothing could be seen, a huge commander's flag with black and white stripes appeared in everyone's vision amidst the intense neighing of the horses. On top of the commander flag, there was a muscular and strong white yak. In an instant, a strong pressure came crashing down on them. Daluan Ruozen's soldiers were about to arrive. Ha! Just when everyone was in an extremely disadvantageous position, Wang Chong faintly smiled and opened his eyes, a dazzling light bursting from them. You're right, Wang Chong said. Pass on my order. All craftsmen are to move out and construct the second defense line to the east of Talas as quickly as possible." "Yes, milord." All infantry, shield men, and the Ganka people, as well as the soldiers of greater and lesser valor, are to immediately take up the first defense line. Work with the city of steel to defend against the Arab attacks. No matter how great the price, you must hold them down. Yes, my lord. Chen Bin, divide the ballista army into 2 groups. 1,500 ballista groups will form one group. One group will remain and use the transport carriages to fire from the high ground. Work with the infantry to defend against the Arab cavalry in the west. Give the other group to Su Qi and have him block the Yuzhan Empire in the east. Yes, Marquis. In a few short moments, Wang Chong had issued a string of orders, each one extremely clear. With this final order, Wang Chong turned to the massive figure of Li Sai. Li Sai, get ready. In a little while, you will come with me to see an old friend of Yuzhan's. At the mention of old friend, Wang Chong's eyes exploded with an intimidating light. Yes. Li Sai's eyes lit up when he heard this. He let out a furious roar, and a powerful battle intent burst forth from his mountainous body. Although Wang Chong had not explicitly said it, everyone understood his final decision. In front of them was the Arabian army and behind them was the Yuzhan army. They were being attacked from both sides and were in an extremely disadvantageous position. But so what? Fight, fight, fight. That was all. The Southwest Army had not retreated, the Triangular Gap had not retreated, and they would not retreat this time. This was the true style of the Tang dynasty. On this continent, there was nothing that could make the Tang dynasty retreat, and certainly nothing that could make the Tang dynasty submit. Rumble! Su Kui, Chen Bin, Zhao Jingyan, Chen Burang, Sun Jiming, Chen Shusun, the king of Ganka, Huang Badian, Kong Xian, Xue Qianjun, and the others galloped off on their war horses. There was no doubt or argument. At this moment, all of them felt like a flame was burning in their hearts and their blood was boiling. The entire Qixi army was like an enormous machine that began to move. Chapter 900. Buzz. Following Wang Chong's order, tens of thousands of craftsmen rode their carriages to the eastern defense line of Talas. Furnaces blazed, black smoke billowed, and metal clattered as the massive steel modules were hammered into the eastern wall by the craftsmen. Streams of molten steel poured down and fastened the steel walls to the eastern wall. For the sake of today's city of Talas, Wang Chong had spent more than 2 months preparing. All the smithing clans of the Central Plains, including the swordsmithing shops and smiths, had received Wang Chong's order. Countless steel modules had been transported to Wushang day and night precisely so that they could deal with today's situation. Modular construction was completely different from ordinary defense line construction. Its biggest advantage was speed. The area behind the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate had originally been empty, but a few moments after Wang Chong gave the order, a long and straight steel wall had appeared on the ground, establishing a firm defense line for the more than 100,000 soldiers. Just like how Wushang had been able to erect a 30-foot-tall steel fortress in a single night, only Wang Chong was capable of such a miraculous feat. Tens of thousands of craftsmen were still pouring and perfecting the second defense line, and there was still some time before they were finished. On the other side, the more than 100,000 soldiers had begun to move according to Wang Chong's order. Hurry, hurry, hurry! In front of the first defense line, Chen Bin, clad in meteoric metal armor and wielding a Wuzi steel sword, was constantly issuing orders. The ballista army, consisting of 3,000 ballistae and 15,000 soldiers, quickly divided into 2. The 7,500 soldiers stationed there quickly boarded the tall transport carriages and began to control the 1,500 ballistae. They were arranged into 3 echelons of 500 soldiers, each of them aiming at the 500 gaps in the steel walls. When the cavalry charged, these steel walls were the best obstacles and obstacles. If the Arabs wanted to charge in, they would have to split up and come through the gaps in the steel walls. This was where the ballista was most lethal. While more than 1,500 ballistae were swiftly taking up positions, the shield-bearers of the more than 100,000 Qixi soldiers were swiftly approaching the first defense line. Row after row, row after row, they took aim at every gap. Throughout the entire process, even the troops of greater and lesser valor were mobilized. The troops of greater and lesser valor weren't as elite as those of the Tang dynasty. In this era where cavalry dominated, greater and lesser valor didn't have much of a presence. However, their spearmen were extremely elite. The spears they were equipped with were far more elite than the spearmen of any other faction. This was also why Wang Chong had hired soldiers from greater and lesser valor. The spearmen of greater and lesser valor and the shield-bearers of the Tang dynasty were almost perfectly coordinated. This defense line was also extremely intimidating and perfectly suited to restrain cavalry. BZZ. The earth quaked as the soldiers of greater and lesser valor, Qi Shi, and Wang Yan's infantry and shield-bearers completed their defense. Meanwhile, the king of Gonka, mounted on a red horse, led the fierce Gonka people and the other mercenaries of the western regions into position. Everyone hear my order. Without my order, no one is allowed to retreat. Anyone who disobeys will be executed. The king of Gonka's eyes were like stars, his sharp gaze sweeping over the steel walls to the surging black tide of the Arab army. All the Gonka people around him were lined up in square formations, their eyes vicious and brimming with fighting intent. Arabia and the Tang dynasty, this was a battle between a lion and an elephant. In this battle, each person needed to make their stand clear and make their own choice. There was no question that the Gonka people had chosen the Tang dynasty. Come, even if I die in battle today, I will have no regrets. The king of Gonka's eyes were bright, his black cloak flapping in the wind as a powerful aura blazed around him. Among Wang Chong's subordinates, the king of Gonka was one of the few saint martial experts, and he was even stronger than the invincible great general Li Sai. The king of Gonka was a proud man. In the western regions he had never lowered his head. But now, this illustrious king of Gonka had lowered his head for Wang Chong. The once lowly Gonka people, the Gonka people known as filthy boars, could finally wash away their shame and live with dignity. The king of Gonka could only repay the Tang dynasty and Wang Chong with his life. Come, let's fight. The king of Gonka fiercely clenched the barbaric god axe, all the blood in his body boiling. Rumble. While the king of Gonka was preparing to fight to the death, on the other side, more than 100,000 soldiers were rapidly mobilizing. If one looked down from the sky, in the vast region in front of the city of Talas, the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty were like a surging river. They seemed fierce, but not disorderly, all of them moving in unison, following some sort of rule. To be able to mobilize more than 100,000 soldiers in such an orderly manner in such a short amount of time without the slightest hint of chaos was something only Wang Chong could do. While tens of thousands of craftsmen were rapidly constructing the second steel wall to the east of the city of Talas, 1,500 ballista teams were moving behind the gap. At the same time, the soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate, the Annam Protectorate, and the Imperial Court, 80% of the Qixi reinforcements were moving in the direction of the Uzun army. Using the infantry, spearmen, shieldmen, and ballista squads to stop the more than 200,000 Arab soldiers, by time for the other armies to attack. Then, using 80% of the army's strength, he would first eliminate the weaker Tibetans in the east, and then turn around and concentrate his forces against the Arabs, defeating them one by one. This was the strategy that Wang Chong had devised in the blink of an eye, and it was also the best way to escape from being attacked from the front and rear. Li Sai, follow me. In the howling winds, Wang Chong mounted the white-hoofed shadow, and his eyes flashed as he shot past the second steel defense line like a wisp of smoke toward the plains to the east of the city of Talas. All soldiers, hear my order. Follow me. Without another word, Li Sai waved his hand and led the 5,000 Wushang cavalry in pursuit of Wang Chong. Dust filled the air as Wang Chong rode east in the direction that the Uzun had come from. Milord, on the high walls of the city of Talas, the Anxi Protectorate army officers looked worriedly in the direction that Wang Chong had gone, and they subconsciously turned to Anxi Protector General Gao Xianji. It's fine. Let him go. Gao Xianji gazed at the 5,000 Wushang cavalry, a glimmer of light in his eyes. In addition, the one who came this time was an old friend of his. Gao Xianji had been in the military for many years, so he had a thorough understanding of the various factions. The moment that Black Yak banner appeared, Gao Xianji knew that it was Daluan Ruozhen, Wang Chang's mortal enemy in the southwest. Although they were both top-class generals of the continent, one was the wise minister of the Ngari royal lineage while the other was the Anxi protector general. Gao Xianji had never seen Daluan Ruozhen before. In comparison, Wang Chong was far more suitable. Rumble! As Wang Chong rode off, the shaking of the earth in the distance grew more intense, gradually reaching a peak. In the distance, behind the hills, smoke and dust billowed like a sea of fog. In that sea of fog, tens of thousands of warhorses suddenly galloped out. In the faint morning light from the east, they were like ghosts stepping out of the underworld. With a strange cry like the wail of an infant, hundreds of vultures flew out from the rear of the army and circled in the sky. In the shadows cast by the vultures, in the center of the thousands of Uzun cavalry, a black banner of a white yak fluttered in the wind. Beneath this banner, a scholarly figure dressed in an azure robe slowly ascended to the top of the hill. Buzz! Everyone paled at the sight of the tens of thousands of furnaces in front of Talas, the tens of thousands of busy craftsmen, and the steel defense line that was rapidly taking shape. The Tang people should have been completely unprepared when they were 18 li from Talas, but by the time they got close enough, the Tang people had begun to construct steel walls with unimaginable speed. At such a close distance, in such a short amount of time, a steel wall had appeared out of thin air. All the Tibetans were flabbergasted and completely unprepared. Prime Minister! Everyone turned to Daluan Ruozhen, awaiting Daluan Ruozhen's decision. The purpose of the cavalry's advance was to catch the opponent off guard and successfully ambush them. But now, the opponent was already prepared, so all the advantages were gone. Prime Minister, what should we do now? He's mobilized his defenses too quickly, and it seems like those steel walls are being constructed even faster than before. At this moment, a tall figure rode out from the rear, glancing at the slowly approaching Wang Chong with a hint of worry in his eyes. Daluan Ruozhen said nothing, only slowly creased his brow as he gazed at that figure on the plains. He had been discovered by Wang Chong when he was 18 li from the city of Talas, but given the speed of the cavalry, by the time Wang Chong had received the news, he had already broken through to the 14 li range. Adding on the time it took for the second confirmation and the reaction time, by the time Wang Chong was able to confirm their identities, the 70,000 soldiers were already within 10 li of the city. At such a close distance, Daluan Ruozhen had believed that when he arrived, he would at least cause chaos in Wang Chong's army, but the scene before him was completely different from what Daluan Ruozhen had imagined. Chapter 901. Pass down my order. Without my order, all troops are forbidden to move. Daluan Ruozhen suddenly opened his mouth, his eyes shining brightly. As for that person, you and I have both met him in the southwest. Given his abilities, isn't it normal for him to have such a performance? And only by defeating him like this will it be more meaningful, right? As Daluan Ruozhen spoke, he suddenly smiled. Hiya! With a slap on the back of his horse, Daluan Ruozhen slowly rode down from the top of the hill against the fierce wind blowing from the city of Talas. At that moment, his gaze passed through the layers of space and fell on the 16 or 17-year-old boy in front of him. There was nothing in the world that could attract his attention except for the boy from the Tang dynasty who was riding over. Marquis, Daluan Ruozhen is coming. In the distance, Li Sai's eyes flashed, and he turned his head to look at Wang Chong said next to him. Wang Chong looked into the distance and smiled. Daluan Ruozhen had very few people with him, only 2 or 3, and none of them were top-notch experts. You stay here and wait for orders. I'll go see Daluan Ruozhen. This? Li Sai hesitated for a moment. He was a little worried, but in the end he nodded. Wang Chong's strength was getting higher and higher. Aside from experts at the level of great general, even brigadier generals were no match for him. There were not many people who could threaten him. Moreover, Daluan Ruozhen was clearly here for Marquis. The southwest was where Daluan Ruozhen had suffered a crushing defeat, and it was also where Marquis had risen to fame. The two were each other's mortal enemies. No matter what, this was their moment, and it was not appropriate for others to interfere. The clattering of hooves echoed over the plains, and the eastern side of the city of Talas was so still that one could hear a pin drop. This was a stark contrast to the rumbling of the Arabs to the west. No one spoke. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the two figures approaching them slowly. Even Gao Xianji, who was standing on the northeast wall, did the same. The appearance of the Uzun soldiers was an important chess piece on the battlefield of Talas. The sudden appearance of more than 70,000 Uzun cavalry was enough to completely alter the course of the battle. Even Gao Xianji was waiting for the war to develop. "Pass down my order. Prepare the army and await my orders." Gao Xianji said. "Yes, my lord." An Anxi Protectorate army officer turned around and left in a hurry. Dust billowed and yellow sand filled the sky. The two figures that weren't particularly tall attracted thousands of gazes. Separated by a distance of more than 500 feet, the two of them stared at each other from afar. Countless bolts of lightning shot out from the void. "Wang Chong, it's been a long time." A voice came from the other side of the dust kicked up by the warhorses. Daluan Ruozhen reined in his horse, a faint smile on his lips. "It's been half a year since we parted in the southwest. Congratulations on being promoted to Qixi Protector General in such a short time. Since the founding of the Tang Dynasty, there hasn't been a Protector General younger than you." "Not at all. Since our last parting, Prime Minister has become even more mature and composed. Even my birds and the Anxi Protectorate army in Suye failed to find any trace of Prime Minister. Prime Minister can't be underestimated." Wang Chong smiled. While Daluan Ruozhen was sizing him up, Wang Chong was sizing up Daluan Ruozhen. Daluan Ruozhen had gotten thinner, much thinner, but he gave Wang Chong the feeling that he had lost much of his brilliance, that he had become much more reserved, and that he had become even more difficult to deal with. It had to be said that Daluan Ruozhen had chosen the perfect moment to place Wang Chong in an extremely disadvantageous position. "How could it be? Didn't you still find out in the end?" Daluan Ruozhen said, a faint smile on his lips. Even though they had met on the battlefield, even though they were enemies, Daluan Ruozhen had still maintained his composure and ease. "It's been half a year since we last met. In the royal capital's prison, this one has never stopped thinking about Lord Protector General. I remember that when we first met in the southwest, you gave me a great gift. The plains of the Ngari royal family are now devoid of people. The water and grass are lush and verdant, without a single cow or sheep. I no longer have to worry about not having enough water and grass in the winter and not being able to graze for 1,000 li. This is all thanks to Sire." Daluan Ruozhen is deeply grateful and engraved in his heart. "Thus, I have prepared a great gift for Sire this time." All was quiet, and Daluan Ruozhen's voice could be heard far across the plains. As he spoke, he still had a faint smile on his lips, and his tone was polite as if he was talking about the most ordinary of matters. But across from him, Li Sai, who was leading the 5,000 Wushang cavalry in the rear, felt his heart thump. In the southwest, Wang Chong had dispatched an army to spread the plague on the plateau of the Ngari royal lineage, and Li Sai had been the one carrying out this plan. Daluan Ruozhen had said that the Ngari royal lineage was lush and verdant, and this truly was correct. But behind this was a barren land of 1,000 li, and the Ngari royal lineage had completely collapsed. As early as when he was in Wushang, Li Sai had received news that the Uzun Empire was now a land of famine. Daluan Ruozhen was the prime minister of the Ngari royal lineage. He had said that he had been thinking about Wang Chong for half a year in the royal capital's prison, and the hatred in his heart was still unfathomably deep. The merciful do not command soldiers, and the virtuous do not command wealth. The path of war has always been a path of slaughter. Between friend and foe, there is naturally no such thing as mercy. As the ruler of the Ngari royal lineage, Prime Minister Wang Chong should understand this simple principle. In truth, I had originally planned for the plague to spread throughout the empire. Alas, it seems that your esteemed Prime Minister Wang Chong intervened and put an end to the plague. Wang Chong indifferently said, not even his eyelids twitching. No matter how many people from the Ngari royal lineage died, Wang Chong would not feel the slightest ripple in his heart. In truth, this was the cruelty and reality of war. If Uzun did not lose, it would be the Tang dynasty that would lose, and at that time, the losses would be even greater. Since Uzun and Meng Shizhao were the ones who had started the war, they had to bear the price. Protector General speaks correctly. Daluan Ruozhen has lost, and the general of a defeated army has nothing to say. Daluan Ruozhen grinned at these words. But whether this battle is won or lost, I hope that Protector General can maintain this attitude. Relax. The Tang dynasty will not lose. Wang Chong firmly declared as he gazed at Daluan Ruozhen 50-some zhang away, his starry eyes exuding a steely will. Buzz. The moment Wang Chong spoke, the atmosphere suddenly changed. The smile on Daluan Ruozhen's lips suddenly vanished, his expression turning grim. These two foes of the Tang dynasty and Uzun stared at each other, their eyes flashing with electricity. Neither of them said anything, but they both felt a strong fighting spirit from each other at the same time. Protector General, it is best not to speak too early. Kindness is like water, not forsaking day and night. Everything is changing, and the Tang dynasty cannot always be the victor. After some time, Daluan Ruozhen suddenly smiled, his gaze looking past Wang Chong to the black tide of Arab soldiers behind the two defense lines. Nothing in this world is impossible. The Tang dynasty will not lose. At least wherever I am, the Tang dynasty will never lose. Wang Chong indifferently said. His voice was neither loud nor soft, but it was brimming with confidence. In the entire world, almost no one dared to say such words to Daluan Ruozhen, a wise minister. Even Huishu Wizong and Dusong Mengpoj had to treat him with respect. Only Wang Chong would dare to be so arrogant and confident in his presence. Is that so? Then this one looks forward to Protector General displaying his divine might like he did in the southwest and sweeping through our three great empires. Daluan Ruozhen faintly smiled, but this time, he did not argue. Turning his horse around, he turned his back on Wang Chong and slowly rode back. Marquis, should we kill him? Xue Qianjun whispered into Wang Chong's ear. Wang Chong had brought 4 guards with him this time, and Xue Qianjun was one of them. During this entire process, his eyes had been fixed on Daluan Ruozhen's back. Xue Qianjun had not taken part in the Southwestern War, but he had long ago heard of Daluan Ruozhen's thunderous reputation in the army. There was no question that Daluan Ruozhen was the greatest mastermind behind Uzun's long-distance assault. If he could kill Daluan Ruozhen, he would be able to deal a heavy blow to Uzun. 500 zhang might be a little far, but with our speed, we still have a chance. There's no need. Wang Chong indifferently said, immediately rejecting Xue Qianjun's proposal. Do you see that Uzun person holding the line behind Daluan Ruozhen? Xue Qianjun subconsciously turned his head. With his back to the morning sun, it was difficult to make out this person's face, but from his attire, he was probably an Uzun commander, and his figure was particularly familiar. Xue Qianjun's brow creased as if remembering something, and his eyes widened. Dusong Mengpoj. Wang Chong smiled and turned his head. Let's go. As Wang Chong left, Daluan Ruozhen met up with Dusong Mengpoj. Prime Minister, should we kill him? Dusong Mengpoj lowered his head, his narrowed eyes bursting with killing intent. The battle between Dayan Mengpoj and the Triangular Gap had always been a sore spot in his heart. Although Daluan Ruozhen and Wang Chong had only met for a brief moment, to Dusong Mengpoj, it felt like he had endured for countless centuries his intense desire to kill. There's no need. Without even turning his head, Daluan Ruozhen urged his horse forward. You can't kill him. Haven't you already experienced how meticulous his plans are? If he were so easy to assassinate, he would have died 1,000 times over by my hand. In addition, don't you see that Gao Xianji is already heading this way? Dazed, Dusong Mengpoj shifted his gaze forward, and as expected, he saw a familiar figure heading his way. Eche, I can only think of another way. Dusong Mengpoj sighed as he turned his horse and rode back to the army. Chapter 902. How is it? Outside Talas, Gao Xianji rode a red steed toward Wang Chong. Daluan Ruozhen has long since colluded with the Arabs. Once we meet, they will quickly attack. Wang Chong calmly said, "So between the Arabs and the Uzun, the first to be dealt with is the Uzun?" Gao Xinji asked. Wang Chong had gathered nearly 80% of his forces on the Eastern Front. It was apparent that he was placing a great deal of importance on the Uzun. Not the Uzun. The first to be dealt with is the Uzun and the Western Turks. Wang Chong shook his head and corrected him with a smile. The Western Turks? Gao Xianji's body trembled, a look of surprise on his face. Rumble. Just when he was feeling confused, the earth began to quake. Behind the 70,000 Uzun soldiers, another cloud of dust soared into the sky. Countless soldiers were charging toward them. Buzz! In just a moment, a huge martial flag rose from the horizon, and a giant golden wolf bearing its fangs and brandishing its claws on the flag instantly leaped into everyone's eyes. Everyone's pupils constricted at the sight of this golden wolf, and the air became extremely solemn. Of all the kingdoms of the continent, only one faction would use this giant wolf as its symbol, the Western Turkic Khaganate. And in the Western Turkic Khaganate, only the most revered of individuals could use this golden wolf. The commander of these soldiers was a Western Turkic great general. Duwisili. Gao Xinji's expression turned extremely grave. Although there were many people that Gao Xinji had never met in his many years in the Western regions, there was no great general that Gao Xinji did not know. The Celestial Wolf Great General. He was one of the best great generals of the Western Turkic Khaganate, an extremely experienced warrior. Even Biting Protector General and Sishun had suffered defeat at his hands. More importantly, Wang Chong, be careful. The one who came is the Celestial Wolf Great General Duwisili of the Western Turks. The black wolf Yabguagudulan that you killed in Chishi was once his subordinate, a general that Duwisili had raised. Not only that, he had one of the 3 strongest cavalry forces of the Western Turkic Khaganate, the Celestial Wolf Cavalry. This force of cavalry isn't large, but it's extremely powerful. In the past, Biting Protector General and Sishun was defeated by this force. Gao Xinji said solemnly. Wang Chong's eyelids twitched as he subconsciously turned his head to look at the huge gold wolf flag. Wang Chong was no stranger to the name of the Celestial Wolf Great General of the Western Turkic Khaganate, Duwisili. Among the kingdoms bordering the Tang dynasty, the Celestial Wolf Great General Duwisili was definitely one of the best generals. This person was definitely on the same level as Gao Xinji. But Wang Chong had never imagined that Duwisili would have a relationship with a Gudulan. So, it was a Gudulan's death that drew him out? Wang Chong's eyes flashed, his mind in turmoil. One was Dusong Mangpoj, one was Duwisili, and now. Wang Chong turned to the fiery red figure standing behind Daluan Ruozhen. This figure was no stranger to Wang Chong. It was none other than that inseparable from Daluan Ruozhen, that inseparable from Huashu Wizang. The tiny city of Talas had gathered Uzun and 3 great generals of the Western Turks. If the Abbasid Caliphate's governor of the East was added to the mix, the Tang dynasty would be facing 4 opponents of the great general level. The situation was extremely disadvantageous to the Tang dynasty. Not only that, Duwisili had also brought with him the Celestial Wolf Cavalry that stood at the apex of the pyramid of the continent. If he added the Arabian Mamelukes and his own 5,000 Wushang cavalry, he had gathered the finest cavalry of all 3 worlds. Such a situation had never occurred in all of history. Something's wrong. Wang Chong's heart thumped as he turned to the distant hills. Behind Daluan Ruozhen, thousands of Uzun cavalry began to flow out. A special force of cavalry, muscular and plump, their armor stained with blood-red insignia, slowly rode out from the rear of the Uzun army. These cavalry were clearly one size larger than the Uzun cavalry around them, like a child standing before an adult. The storm-like aura on their bodies instantly attracted everyone's attention, causing everyone who saw them to feel an invisible pressure. The Mutri Great Cavalry. Li Sai blurted out as he stared at the black and red Uzun cavalry, all the muscles in his body instantly tensing up. Wang Chong said nothing, but his expression was just as grave. He knew that Daluan Ruozhen had come prepared, but Wang Chong had not expected him to bring with him the oldest and strongest of the Uzun cavalry. The Mutri Great Cavalry. It was rumored that more than 300 years ago, this was the strongest cavalry named after the Uzun Mutri Tsenpo. They shouldered the duty of protecting the royal capital and never left the Uzun capital. In his last life, even when the Arabian Empire invaded the plateau, the Uzun had not used them. On the entire plateau, this was the only cavalry force that bore the name Great Cavalry. In terms of fighting power, this cavalry force was far superior to the Qinghai soldiers and white braves that Wang Chong had already destroyed. Wang Chong had never imagined that Daluan Ruozhen would have the ability to mobilize the Mutri Great Cavalry. The Celestial Wolf Cavalry, the Mutri Great Cavalry, the Wushang Cavalry, and the Abbasid Caliphate's Mamluks, the world's best cavalry forces had all gathered in one place. This was unprecedented in the history of cavalry. Buzz! A familiar pressure appeared in Wang Chong's mind, causing his heart to thump. A moment later, the Stone of Destiny's familiar voice resounded in his ear. Destiny is a strange interweaving. When the world's best and most outstanding things gather together, there will inevitably be a subtle reaction. Either they work together or they fight for supremacy. Whether the world will shatter or forge a new structure will depend on that special moment and the choice of destiny. The mission, Clash of Destiny, has been activated. The difficulty has been increased. Starting from now, for each Mutri Great Cavalry or Celestial Wolf Cavalry killed by the Wushang Cavalry, user will be rewarded with 30 points of destiny energy, and for each Mamluk Cavalry killed by user will be rewarded with 50 points of destiny energy. For each Wushang Cavalry killed by user will be deducted 100 points of destiny energy. The rewards and penalties for the mission will be calculated during battle. Notice, if the Mutri Great Cavalry, Celestial Wolf Cavalry, and Mamluk Cavalry are killed by soldiers other than the Wushang Cavalry, the rewards and penalties will not be calculated. Wang Chong froze at this voice, a strange feeling emerging in his mind. He had not expected the Stone of Destiny to issue this mission at a time like this. The mission issued by the Stone of Destiny seemed to open up a new path for him to accumulate destiny energy on the battlefield, but that was not the case at all. Other than the Wushang Cavalry, Wang Chong's strongest force was the Ballista Army. But according to the Stone of Destiny's final words, killing the Mutri Great Cavalry, Celestial Wolf Cavalry, or Mamluk Cavalry would not be considered a reward. This also meant that if Wang Chong wanted to obtain the destiny energy rewarded by the Stone of Destiny, he could only do so through the Wushang Cavalry and cavalry duels. Not only that, each time the Wushang Cavalry killed a Mutri Great Cavalry or Celestial Wolf Cavalry, they would be rewarded with 30 points of destiny energy and 50 points of Mamluk Cavalry. However, each death of a Wushang Cavalry would result in a deduction of 100 points of destiny energy. So the Stone of Destiny has already taken into account the fact that all of them are wearing meteoric metal armor, which is far stronger than theirs? Wang Chong wondered to himself. Marquis, what do we do now? Li Sai turned his head to Wang Chong. Pass on my order. Prepare for battle. Wang Chong looked into the distance, smiled coldly, and then quickly rode off. At almost the same time, Gao Xinji passed on the order to return to the second defense line with Wang Chong. In the distance, tens of thousands of Uzun cavalry were stationed atop a long, tall hill, but they did not immediately move out. Many pairs of eyes followed Daluan Ruozhen to the rear of the army. There, a massive banner of a wolf on a blue background was leading the countless Western Turkic cavalry in a surging wave. At the front of this army was an exceptionally tall and muscular Turkic steed. He was riding a Turkic steed, and his sharp eyes made him seem like a war god of the 9 heavens. Behind him was an army of cavalry wearing silver armor covered in strange inscriptions. Unlike Yusang or any other cavalry, these cavalry were covered in barbs, and from a distance, they wore strange armor that made them seem like a savage silver wolf. Just a glance at them was enough to make one shiver in fear and dread. Brr! The howls of wolves resounded through the air as the tens of thousands of celestial wolf cavalry, each leading 10 some 4-foot-tall wolves, surged toward the hills. Dewissely, you really did come. Daluan Ruozhen stood at the top of the hill and heartily laughed. In this three-way alliance, the last of Daluin Ruozen's plans had finally appeared. Since I've been invited, how could I not come to this banquet to divide up the Tang dynasty? A thunderous voice resounded in everyone's ears. Nay let out a heaven-shaking howl, and in the howling winds, Duwussili took the lead and soared into the air, shooting through the air like a blazing flame to appear at the top of the hill. In the howling winds, Duwussili's position on the top of the hill seemed to stir up a storm, the enormous pressure forcing everyone to back away. Chapter 903. Duwussili, stop. Huoshu Wuzong grimaced as he moved to stand in front of Daluin Ruozen. At almost the same time, Dusong Mengpoj released a powerful energy to protect Daluin Ruozen and keep Duwussili's energy at bay. The Uzun and the Turks had never been a monolithic bloc. Long before the Tang dynasty had entered the western regions, the two sides had been locked in a fierce struggle. If not for the fact that the Tang dynasty had entered the western regions as a third party and taken control of the region, drawing the attention of both sides, the two sides would still be locked in a fierce struggle. Although the Uzun and the Western Turks no longer had many conflicts, if they succeeded in defeating the Tang dynasty, they would once more be enemies. In these circumstances, Duwussili probably did not mind killing Daluin Ruozen. Relax. Duwussili will not interfere. Daluin Ruozen waved his hand and indifferently said. As he walked out from Dusong Mengpoj and Huoshu Wuzong's protection, he confidently walked up to Duwussili. Urjin, welcome back. As Duwussili stared at Daluin Ruozen, his eyes wavered for a moment before finally bursting into laughter. Ah, good. Prime Minister, you're quite bold. With this long laugh, the atmosphere between the two sides suddenly became much gentler. The 5 prime ministers of the Uzun Empire were on the Western Turkic Khaganate's kill list. This was the result of a long-standing grudge, and no one knew the exact origins of it. But for Daluin Ruozen to be able to appear so calmly and fearlessly before him on their first meeting, Duwussili couldn't help but admire his boldness. Is that so? What's the situation with the Tang people? As Duwussili spoke, he looked across the hills and at the city of Talas in the distance. Even Duwussili's expression changed when he saw the 2 long steel lines of defense. What a fast reaction. Even with the ability of the Prime Minister, he couldn't break through their defenses? Great General, you should not be too careless. That fellow might be young, but he is the young Marquis that the Holy Emperor of the Tang dynasty personally bestowed upon him. Moreover, he was personally bestowed upon him the courtesy name of the Tang Emperor, the Son of Heaven's disciple. We've already lost to him several times. Even your black wolf Yabga died at his hands. A mellow voice came from the side as Dusong Mengpoj walked up from behind. Duwussili didn't say anything, but he couldn't help but frown. The Uzun had only failed a few times, and they were not the Western Turkic Khaganate, so they were not necessarily incompetent. But when he heard the words Black Wolf Yabgu, Duwussili swallowed them back down. The defeat of a brigadier general like the Black Wolf Yabgu in the Battle of Chishi was still right in front of his eyes, and the Khagan's 4th prince had even been captured and extorted for 200,000 of their finest Turkic warhorses. The Uzun probably already knew of this matter. The two sides were evenly matched, and neither was much better than the other. There's no need for all of you to worry about the Black Wolf Yabgu. I came here for him in the first place. No matter what, I will personally kill that brat. Duwussili's eagle gaze quickly locked onto Wang Chong in the middle of the vast army of the Tang people. It seems like we've reached an agreement. Daluin Ruozen faintly smiled. This was the first time in history that the Uzun and the Western Turks, mortal enemies of the Western regions, had worked together, an event of unprecedented grandeur. And before this, Daluin Ruozen had only communicated with Duwussili once through his eagle. Although he had heard of him, he had never met him. But at this moment, Daluin Ruozen was sure that in this battle, Duwussili would be his staunchest ally. What did the Arab say? Duwussili did not argue, and as he gazed into the distance, he got straight to the point. This battle appeared to be an alliance between the Uzun and the Western Turks, but the crucial factor was the Arabian Empire on the other side of the battlefield. It was precisely because of the Arabian Empire's invitation that they had agreed to this alliance. This was also the prerequisite for Dewussali's agreement. Otherwise, if the Western Turkic Khaganate helped the Arabs deal with the Tang dynasty, and the Arabian Empire won and turned against him, he would be shooting himself in the foot. The Turks were a nomadic people who moved widely, so they had a good understanding of the distant Arabian Empire. It was an existence even stronger than the Uzun Empire. Unless absolutely necessary, the Western Turkic Khaganate would never be willing to go to war with the Arabian Empire. Relax. Everything has been arranged. I've already sent a letter to the Arabian governor of the East. He has guaranteed that if we win this battle, he will work with our Uzun and the Western Turks to divide up the western regions. Daluin Ruozan indifferently said, his every action exuding the confidence of a strategist. But the Arabs have always been very ambitious. If they win and then turn against us, won't we be inviting a wolf into the house? What should we do then? Has Prime Minister considered these things? Dewussali went straight to the point. I've naturally considered these things. Daluin Ruozan softly chuckled, apparently having predicted that Dewussali would ask this question. Thus, I've already made an agreement with the Arabian governor of the East. If we win this battle, our three sides will continue to work together, enter Anxi, pass Qishi, enter Longxi, conquer the capital of the Tang dynasty, and divide up the central plains. Bang! Dusong Mangpoj, Huashu Wizong, and Dewussali trembled at Daluin Ruozan's soft laughter, massive waves stirring in their minds. Daluin Ruozan was proficient in many languages, and he had written all of his letters with Daluin Ruozan in Arabic. Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Wizong only knew that the two sides had agreed to work together to deal with the Tang dynasty, but Daluin Ruozan had not said what they had discussed, so the two of them had no idea. The two had originally believed that their alliance would stop at defeating the Tang dynasty, but to their surprise, Daluin Ruozan had already made an agreement with the Arabian governor of the East to continue advancing after victory and divide up the Tang dynasty. Even Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Wizong, two great generals of the Uzun, were deeply shocked by this idea. The Uzun, the Western Turks, and the powerful Arabian Empire. If they succeeded, they would form an alliance of unprecedented proportions. The alliance of the three empires would truly be able to shake up the map of the continent and completely alter the map of the world, achieving a feat that the Western Turkic Khaganate and the Uzun Empire had never accomplished before. Good. Celestial Wolf Great General Dewussali heartily laughed at Daluin Ruozan's words, his eyes bursting with excitement. Daluin Ruozan, I truly didn't misjudge you. You have guts. The Arabs have not yet stabilized their footing, and they haven't even defeated Gao Xinji, so they have even less understanding of the Central Plains. That Abu Muslim would never propose this sort of condition, so this is probably your idea. Wise minister, of the four famous ministers of the Uzun's four royal lineages, you are ranked first. I was right to agree to your alliance. Relax, I can agree on behalf of Ishbara Khagan. If we succeed in this battle, we will divide the spoils together. Tang. Heavens! Your Majesty! Bang! With Dewussali's order, the tens of thousands of Western Turkic cavalry, including one of the three strongest cavalry forces, the Celestial Wolf Cavalry, surged forward and leapt onto the hills closest to Talas. The illustrious silver Celestial Wolf Cavalry of the Western Turks stood side by side with the black and red armored Mutri Great Cavalry of Yuseng, one on the left and one on the right, exuding an unprecedented pressure. Translated by Hypersheep 325. At this moment, the two mortal enemies of the western regions, Uzun and the Western Turkic Khaganate, had truly joined forces. Clang, clang, clang. Outside the walls of Talas, at the second defense line, tens of thousands of hammers were hammering down, each time creating a shower of sparks. The first time it smashed down, the steel defense line became a little stronger. One beehive after another was set up on the steel walls, creating a wall of death on the foreign battlefield to the west of the Tsong Mountains. Tens of thousands of steel walls, tens of thousands of beehives, and all kinds of ordnance. Only at this moment did Wang Chong's 2 months of preparations finally reveal themselves. But even so, the mood on the battlefield was not relaxed in the slightest. On the contrary, it was even tenser. Everyone could see the giant banner of the Golden Wolf on a blue background atop the distant hill, as well as the Western Turkic great general beneath it, his aura as powerful as a destructive storm. The tens of thousands of Mutri great cavalry and celestial wolf cavalry standing side by side like tigers eyeing their prey placed a heavy pressure on everyone's hearts. The sight of the Western Turks, the Uzun great general, and Daluan Ruozan standing side by side under the banner was suffocating. Behind them, the rumbling footsteps caused the earth to shake. The Arabs were still unhurried, approaching at an extremely steady pace. Behind the first defense line, the king of Ganka and the thousands of Tang people soldiers were concentrating on dealing with the enemy. But behind the second defense line, Wang Chong, Wang Yan, Li Sai, and Cheng Qianli, the four highest commanders of the Tang dynasty, were standing in a row, none of them paying attention to what was behind them. The atmosphere was tense and oppressive. Lord Protector General, how do you intend to fight this battle? Gao Xianji asked, his eyes still fixed forward. The Anxi Protectorate army only had 10,000 some soldiers left, and even with the mercenaries in the city, it only had around 30,000, far fewer than Wang Chong's Qixi Protectorate. In terms of soldiers, there was no question that Wang Chong was the true commander of this battle. Gao Xianji was only a supporting figure. Ha will deal with soldiers with arms and water with earth. This battle is unavoidable. The Tang dynasty has been silent for far too long, and it needs a battle like this to make everyone understand that on this continent of kingdoms, the Tang dynasty is still number one, still the strongest existence in the world. Wang Chong indifferently said, his eyes still fixed forward. These simple words caused Gao Xianji, Wang Yan, and Cheng Qianli, the three commanders of the Tang dynasty, to widen their eyes, their minds stirring in great waves, a flame that had been dormant for a long time beginning to burn. Truly, the Tang dynasty had been silent for far too long. In the past, the Great Tang, with just a few 100,000 soldiers, had dared to pursue the Turkic Khaganate north and south, suppressing all the surrounding countries and pressing into the capitals of the various kingdoms. With 8,000 cavalry, they had dared to chase the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Turkic Khaganate several thousand li away, even abandoning the Khagan's court. Chapter 904. Hawal said, whether it's the Turks, Uzun, Arabia, or any of the surrounding countries, when has the Tang dynasty ever feared them? Lord Protector General, no matter what you want to do, we will do it according to your wishes. Be at ease and do it. I will do my best to cooperate with you. Gao Xianji said, his eyes flashing. In the 17-year-old Wang Chong, he could faintly sense the passion that he had lost for so long. So what if it was Uzun? So what if it was Arabia? In the past, hadn't he relied on his fearless drive to carve out a path through the complex environment of the Western regions, ultimately earning the favor of the Holy Emperor and becoming Anxi Protector General, the war god of the Western regions? Ha, good. Wang Chong's confidence swelled at these words. One was the war saint of the apocalypse, and the other was the Anxi war god. Perhaps in terms of elite fighting power, the Tang dynasty could not compare to the Arabs, Uzun, or the Western Turks, but this combination was already extremely astonishing. When had the Tang dynasty ever used such an overwhelming force when conquering its borders? Moreover, the art of war was based on the principle of using the head-on to achieve victory through surprise. On the battlefield, there would never be so many surprise soldiers that one could rely on. A qualified commander had to be able to use his outstanding commanding ability to crush and kill his foe in a one-on-one, one-on-many battle. There was nothing fancy about this sort of battle. This was the ultimate embodiment of a commander's ability and talent in the art of war. This was a war of commanders. Zhang Ke, have you found out how many people there are on the other side? Wang Chong indifferently said as he gazed at the distant Uzun and Turkic army. Replying to Marquis, the Uzun have sent out their vulture army. We don't have enough rock eagles to get close, so we can only make a rough estimate. The Uzun have more than 70,000 while the Turks have more than 40,000, all of them elites. A young and childish voice came from behind him. Zhang Ke was kneeling behind the four Tang commanders, the Rock Eagle King Xiao Sha perched on his shoulder, his expression respectful. The Uzun's vulture army was extremely large. Flocks of vultures blotted out the sky, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. Coupled with the hunting falcons of the Arabian Empire, the birds of the Tang dynasty were in an extremely difficult situation. They could only rely on the master archers on the ground to intimidate the enemy birds and buy some space for the rock eagles to move. Even the number of 40,000 Turks had been obtained through Zhang Kei's Xiaosha's aerial reconnaissance. 70,000 Uzun soldiers and 40,000 elites of the Western Turkic Khaganate add up to around 120,000. That's enough. Since the Uzun and the Western Turks aren't willing to move for the time being, let's force them to fight. Wang Chong held his hands behind his back as he gazed at the distant hills, his body naturally exuding a powerful aura. The war saint of the Central Plains that had once dominated the world was gradually fusing with his current status as Qixi Protector General. The current Wang Chong did not seem like a 17-year-old at all. On the contrary, he exuded the aura of a dignified and domineering commander, causing Wang Yan and Go Xianji's eyelids to twitch uncontrollably. "Old Senior Zhang, let's begin," Wang Chong said without turning his head. Zhang Shouji obey. Order. With this order, the carriage began to move. As the leader of the tens of thousands of craftsmen, Zhang Shouji quickly boarded the carriage and rode away. Bang! With an earth-shattering boom, the two long steel lines of defense seemed to have a life of their own as they spread forward at an accelerated speed. Boom boom boom. One massive steel wall after another crashed to the ground, followed by a second, a third, a fourth. Thick plumes of smoke soared into the sky, immediately attracting the attention of the Arabs and Tibetans. What are these Tang people doing? Don't they already have two defense lines? Do they have some other trick up their sleeve? Dusong Mangpoj couldn't help but widen his eyes at this sight. Although he had only encountered Wang Chong's steel fortress once, Wang Chong's steel walls and fortress had left an indelible impression on this Uzun imperial great general. Dusong Mangpoj had suffered the greatest defeat of his life there. Dusong Mangpoj had instinctively become deeply wary of Wang Chong's steel defense line, and he had been traumatized by it. Daluan Ruozhen said nothing, but his brows slightly creased. He wants to completely separate US from Abu Muslim. Daluan Ruozhen squinted as he looked forward. If there was anyone in the world who understood Wang Chong's plans like the back of their hand, it was probably him. In the Southwest campaign, although Daluan Ruozhen had lost, he had also forced Wang Chong to the end of his rope. And in the few months he spent in the dungeon of the royal capital, he repeatedly reviewed, analyzed, and studied the battle in his mind. Daluan Ruozhen was well aware that Wang Chong would never do anything without a reason. His every move had to have a special goal. What do you mean? Weren't we working with the Arabs to attack the Tang dynasty from the east and the west? What meaning does he have in doing this? Dewusili asked in confusion. Long before he had set off, Ishbara Khagan had sent a large amount of information on Wang Chong to his desk. But information was information, and the real person was the real person. Dewusili still didn't have a very good understanding of this Qixi Protector General who had extorted 200,000 high-quality Turkic warhorses from the Western Turkic Khaganate. This is different. Daluan Ruozhen shook his head, his expression turning grave as he gazed at the roiling smoke in the distance. We are working with the Arabs to attack from the east and the west. This is an alliance formed by the forces of our three sides merging into one. We are one side, and the Tang dynasty is the other. If we allow them to use steel walls to separate us, the Tang dynasty will be in the middle to deal with us, and this war will become a three-way war. We will be one side, the Arabs will be another, and the Tang dynasty will be the third. Moreover, if we allow the Tang dynasty to stand in the middle and separate us, our ability to communicate with the Arabs will be affected, which is extremely disadvantageous to us. At the very least, we will have to use carrier pigeons to communicate with Abu Muslim. Daluan Ruozhen said. So you originally hoped to immediately change your strategy and ally with the Arabs to attack the Tang people as soon as the battle turned for the worse? Dewusili asked. I did have this thought, but it's no longer possible. Daluan Ruozhen indifferently said, his eyes fixed on the distance. Wang Chong always had a way to use the simplest of methods to complicate a situation that should have been clear at a glance. Even his enemy, Daluan Ruozan, was filled with admiration for this. In the entire Central Plains, no one is stronger than him in the art of war. Everyone says that Wang Zhongxi is the war god of the Central Plains, but not even Wang Zhongxi can compare to Wang Chong in the art of war. Daluan Ruozan mentally sighed. In his many years as prime minister of the Ngari royal lineage, in a stalemate with the fierce tiger of the Tang dynasty, Zhangqiu Jianqiong, in the southwest, Daluan Ruozan had never felt such an intense threat from a single person. This sort of dazzling talent was worthy of praise, and it was also the sort of person that Daluan Ruozan had sworn to destroy. With this sort of person around, Uzan would never be able to rest in peace. Is it really impossible to circle around? Huashu Huizong reluctantly said as he looked into the distance. The more than 100,000 Western Turks and Tibetans and the 270 to 80,000 Arabian soldiers had been easily separated by a few of Wang Chong's steel fortresses. East and West had been separated, each fighting their own battles. This didn't sound like a three-way attack on the Tang dynasty, but a three-way attack on the Tang dynasty. It was rather difficult to accept. Daluan Ruozan shook his head, his eyes shooting a glance at the distant towering city of Talas. The terrain determines it. He's just taking advantage of the situation and using it. The geography of Talas is extremely complex. Although the entire region is a vast plain, it's actually quite difficult to deal with. Although the entire region is a plain, this plain is surrounded by thousands of ravines, barren mountains, and many deep ravines. The terrain is steep and difficult to climb. This was also the reason the Shur kingdom chose to build their city here. Daluan Ruozan calmly said. Talas was the battlefield he had chosen to crush the Tang dynasty and completely disintegrate the structure of the western regions. Daluan Ruozan had once carefully studied this place and knew it like the back of his hand. Behind the city of Talas are those dangerous cliffs, and there is only a very narrow path between the city and these cliffs. If we want to get through, we can only get through the plain in front of us. Now that Wang Chong has divided that area with 2 steel defense lines, he has completely cut off the path between us and the Arabs, turning passivity into initiative. If my guess isn't wrong, he will definitely leave a gap in those 2 defense lines and not build them to the end. Why? Surround 3 and destroy 1. Daluan Ruozan indifferently said, giving the answer in a single sentence. In the distance, as if in response to Daluan Ruozan's words, the 2 steel defense lines that had been madly expanding slowly came to a stop, leaving a narrow gap between them and the plain. That's enough. At almost the same time, Wang Chong stood in the middle of the army and waved his hand, giving the order to stop. Surround 3 and destroy 1. Leave a path for them. Little brother, that Daluan Ruozan isn't easy to deal with. By using this method to surround 3 and destroy 1, you probably won't be able to fool Daluan Ruozan. The clattering of footsteps and the clattering of armor came from the rear. Wang Chong's big brother, Wang Fu, had at some point walked up from the rear. The War of the Southwest. It's not that we can't fool him, but that he will definitely know. Wang Chong indifferently said, his eyes focused on that scholarly figure on the hill, his expression confident and confident. Chapter 905. Buzz. Wang Fu's brow rose when he heard Wang Chong's final words. The superior party attacks the schemes, and the superior party attacks the mind. The Wang clan was a clan of ministers and generals, and it possessed a deep and profound knowledge. Wang Fu knew all about the art of war and strategy. But his little brother would occasionally say something like this, and Wang Fu had no recollection of it even after searching his mind. Right now, whether Daluan Ruozan is willing or not, he has to move. Wang Chong confidently said. Abu Muslim and Daluan Ruozan were both top-class generals. The former had been able to force Gao Xianji into desperate straits, and there was no need to speak of the latter. Against these two, one needed to use all their strength and not be the slightest bit careless. But as the war saint of the Central Plains, Wang Chong still had a way to seize the initiative and seize the initiative. There was a saying in the art of war. Encircle the enemy 10 times, attack 5 times, divide the enemy 10 times, and fight the enemy 10 times. If one didn't have as many soldiers as the enemy and had nowhere to retreat to, the best method was to rely on fortifications and force the enemy to attack. In a siege, the defending side would always have the fewest soldiers and the greatest advantage. And now, Wang Chong was urging Daluan Ruozhen to strike. This is an open scheme. He's not afraid that we won't fall for it, much less that we won't go. If we don't want to be completely divided and controlled, we have to attack. On the distant hills, Daluan Ruozhen looked down at the three imperial great generals as he slowly spoke. In many matters, he and Wang Chong were not enemies, but allies. Wang Chong knew what he was thinking, and he also knew what Wang Chong was thinking. This was a scheme without a scheme. A true scheme was one in which, even if the enemy saw through it, they would still be helpless and could only follow your plan. However, our forces are all here. When the three parties converged, they had a total of 400,000 soldiers and horses, which was far more than the Tang dynasty. There was no reason to delay. Send a signal to the Abbasid Caliphate. Prepare to attack. This time, our three empires will work together to destroy all the soldiers of the Tang dynasty in the western regions. This is also an overt plot. At the end, Daluan Ruozhen sneered, and his eyes shone with a cold light. The Abbasid Caliphate, the Western Turkic Khaganate, and the Uzun Empire, the three oldest empires of the western regions, had finally gathered to deal with the newcomer, the Tang dynasty. Completely uprooting the roots of the Tang dynasty in the western regions once and for all was also the only opportunity for the Uzun Empire to defeat the Tang dynasty in Daluan Ruozhen's plan. Woo! Daluan Ruozhen swung down his arm, and to the east of the city of Talas, the ancient and resounding yak horn resounded through the world. It was different from any previous war horn. The sound of this horn had a unique rhythm, like some kind of signal. All right, the Uzun has sent a signal. At almost the same time, on the western side of Talas, the Abbasid governor of the East Abu Muslim slowly stood up from his seat, his eyes bursting with a light that made even the sun and moon lose their luster. Khalid, your subordinate is here. A rough and loud voice, like that of a savage beast, came from the side. With this voice, an enormous shadow appeared, engulfing Abu Muslim and the tensome Arabian soldiers around him. In the light of the rising sun in the east, one could clearly see that this was a fierce Arab general, at least 7 meters tall, even larger than the invincible great general Lisai. His body was as thick and muscular as an iron pillar, and just by standing there, the earth seemed to sink a little. When this person stood in front of Abu Muslim, even the sun in the east seemed to be blocked out. And this giant of a man made the muscular Arabian soldiers around him seem like children in comparison. In a flash, all the Arabian soldiers raised their heads to see that enormous figure and began to retreat in fear, as if they had encountered a savage beast. The beast of Arabia, Khalid. Of all the Arab generals in the east, he was the most brutal, ferocious, bloodthirsty, warlike, and most terrifying existence. This was a humanoid behemoth that had been born to fight and kill. During the expansion of the Arabian Empire, the beast of Arabia Khalid had set a record of fighting for 3 days and 3 nights in the conquest of Khorasan, killing as many people as he could. At the end of the conquest of Khorasan, he was the only one left to fight. But it was this man's savagery and viciousness that had defeated the last remnants of Khorasan's army. This savagery and viciousness had utterly crushed their will to fight, causing Khorasan to calm down. Khalid's physical strength, tenacity, savagery, and savagery were all things that no other Arab general could compare to. This beast of Arabia was a bloodthirsty beast. Once he was released, he had to come back for blood. Take your Iron Beast army and kill the Tang dynasty. I need you to completely destroy their defense line. Abu Muslim said. Even in front of Khalid, the aura of the governor of Iron and Blood was as vast as the sun and moon, impossible to suppress. Yes, my lord. The Arabian beast Khalid's eyes shone with savagery as he turned his head to stare at the Tang defense line, which was still roiling with smoke and flames. Khalid looked to the east and gave a heaven-shaking roar. In a flash, a fiendish and murderous force of Arab cavalry, clearly taller and larger than the other Arab soldiers, stood out from the more than 200,000 Arab soldiers like a crane in a flock of chickens. In the middle of this army, a black steed more than 9 feet tall, twice the size of the other war horses, neighed as it charged out of the formation and galloped to Khalid's side. Boom! Khalid did not say a word. His eyes flashed as he jumped onto the black divine chariot and sped away. Abu Muslim stood in the rear of the army, watching Khalid disappear into the distance. He quickly looked away and waved his hand. Give the signal to the Uzun and the Western Turks. Have the army move out. Bung. With Abu Muslim's order, war drums began to thunder from the direction of the Arabian Empire. These drums were extremely heavy, with 3 long beats and 2 short beats. They were completely different from normal war drums. Thumping could be heard through the battlefield in the center of the city of Talas to the distant hills to the east. Prime Minister, the Arabs have received the signal. An Uzun general turned to Dalen Trinling. Dalen Trinling grunted and nodded. I see it. Rumble. On the other side of the Tang dynasty army, to the west of the city of Talas, the Arab army that had been slowly advancing suddenly picked up its pace. If their advance had been like the crawl of a snail, it was now like the galloping of a ferocious beast. The entire region of Talas was like a small boat in a storm, fiercely shuddering. Marky, the Arabs are attacking. Within the 2 steel defense lines, Xue Qianjun suddenly turned his head to Wang Chong, a nervous look in his eyes. Talas, which had been quiet for so long since yesterday, had once more begun to stir with the clouds of war. The wind was vast and mighty, and the airflow was surging. Everyone could only hear a series of dense, heavy war drums in their ears. And when the more than 200,000 cavalry suddenly began to move, they began to move with a momentum that could topple mountains and overturn the earth, placing an enormous pressure on everyone. The atmosphere of war instantly became 10 times, 100 times more intense. I understand. Wang Chong indifferently said, his words silencing Xue Qianjun. Xue Qianjun turned his head and saw that Wang Chong's hair was blown about in the fierce winds. Amidst the flickering light, Wang Chong's expression was resolute, composed, and unperturbed. Xue Qianjun felt like an invisible energy had been injected into his mind, and he silently turned around to stand guard at Wang Chong's side. The battle had begun. Daluan Ruozhen, it's your turn. Wang Chong looked to the east, a bright light in his eyes. Move out. At almost the same time on the hills, Daluan Ruozhen's eyes flashed with cold light as he gave the order to attack. Rumble. On the eastern side of the battlefield, tens of thousands of Tibetan and Western Turkic soldiers surged down from the rolling hills like a dam had been breached. At that moment, heaven and earth were silent. Not a single sound could be heard. The entire world was silent, and only the sound of the war horses could be heard. The Arabs, Uzun, and Turks all chose to attack at the same time. The 3 sides added up to a total of more than 400,000 elite soldiers. Facing an opponent of only slightly more than 100,000, they did not hesitate to choose the simplest, crudest, and most direct method. Gallop. The hooves of the war horses thundered from both the east and west sides of the battlefield, each step seemingly stomping on the hearts of the Tang soldiers. More than 400,000 soldiers and horses came roaring from all directions like a raging wave. The winds howled and the war horses howled. As the war horses approached, the tense atmosphere on the battlefield of Talas began to multiply. But in front of the city of Talas, between the 2 steel walls, all was quiet. The tens of thousands of Chishi soldiers were tensed up, all of them tightly gripping their weapons, the veins on the back of their hands bulging as they nervously stared forward. The more than 100,000 soldiers were silent, but the tension was suffocating. Ready. Chapter 906. Buzz. The entire army immediately calmed down at this order, and then began to move. Clang, clang, clang. The first to react were the shieldmen. Countless well-crafted shields slammed into the ground, followed by the spearmen of greater and lesser valor, their spears aimed outward. Behind them, the cavalry unsheathed their sabers and swords, and with the creaking of gears, The 3,000 ballista teams on the east and west sides simultaneously loaded their ballista bolts and pulled open the gears. In this entire process, the movements of more than 10,000 people were synchronized, and even the creaking of the gears were identical, their precision inconceivable. Once all this was done, the energy exuded by the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty suddenly changed. Like a dreadful war machine, it began to prepare for the dreadful harvest of war. A heaven-shaking roar came from the west side of the city of Talas. The Arabs had been the first to attack. The tens of thousands of Arab cavalry galloped forward, but in the very center of the Arab cavalry, the army parted to allow an incomparably tall figure on a divine steed to charge out. When he saw this figure, even Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes. Tall, especially tall. Li Sai's stature in the Central Plains, perhaps even in the Four Seas, would already be considered outstanding. But this person was even taller than Li Sai. Even though they were separated by a distance of several hundred feet, his sturdy figure still gave off an extremely strong visual impact. His warhorse was even taller than a man by two heads, an extremely rare sight even among divine steeds. This person was covered in black and red armor from head to toe, and he wielded two massive hammers in his hands. As he galloped on his horse, he madly howled, appearing just like the legendary mighty miracle god. Gudhaden Krahi. The mighty miracle god Arab general roared, his eyes exuding a frightening light as he charged forward. Behind him, tens of thousands of tall and equally ferocious Arabs roared as they charged, seething with killing intent. They were also Arabs, but compared to the Umar and his cavalry that Wang Chong's forces had defeated, these Arab cavalry were much stronger. In an instant, in front of the first line of defense, the shield-bearers of the Tang dynasty were resolute and able to hold on. But all the other soldiers of the western regions showed a look of fear. That's Khalid, a fierce Arab general. At some point, Cheng Qianli had ridden up to Wang Chong's side, his eyes brimming with worry as he gazed at the distant Arabian giant. "What are you doing?" "We fought with the Arabs for 2 months, and many of our soldiers died at Khalid's hands, and their deaths were extremely gruesome. Khalid liked to toss his opponents into the sky and then attack them from below. Therefore, almost none of his opponents had a complete corpse. General, she tried to kill him before, but not only did he fail, he was heavily injured. General, she was Shi Yuanqing, the third-ranked individual of the Anxi Protectorate Army, a saint martial expert whose strength was second only to Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli. If even Shi Yuanqing had been injured, one could easily imagine just how powerful this Khalid was. "Is that so?" Wang Chong coldly stared at the distant Khalid, his eyes flashing with thick killing intent. The beast of Arabia, Khalid. Wang Chong had never imagined that Abu Muslim would send out the #1 general of the Arab East for the first battle. "What Arab general? He's only a so-so in my eyes. General Cheng, there's no need for you to worry. Call General Shi over. I have a way to have him kill this Khalid." Wang Chong held his hands behind his back and confidently said, "Ugh." Cheng Qianli stared in shock at Wang Chong. He had only said these words to warn Wang Chong to be careful. His opponent was extremely powerful, but he had not expected Wang Chong to say that he had a way to turn defeat into victory for Shi Yuanqing and kill Khalid. This left Cheng Qianli flabbergasted. If anyone else had said these words, he might have taken them to be joking. But Wang Chong's serious expression made it impossible to ignore his words. "Protector General Wang, do you really have a way to kill Khalid? How will I know if I don't try?" Wang Chong indifferently said. Shi Yuanqing arrived very quickly, and with the clattering of hooves, the gate opened. A stalwart figure riding a pure white steed appeared behind Wang Chong. "Protector General Wang, you were looking for me?" The stalwart figure dismounted and stopped at Wang Chong's side. His expression was stern, and his face seemed as if it had been chiseled by a knife or chisel. Wang Chong said nothing, only began to carefully examine this third-ranked officer of the Anxi Protectorate Army. Shi Yuanqing's injuries were not light, and before he had even gotten close, Wang Chong could already smell the thick stench of blood. As he carefully examined Shi Yuanqing, Wang Chong immediately noticed the blood-stained bandages on his body and arm. It seems like his injuries are very severe. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. When Gao Xianzhi had left the city, Cheng Qianli and the other Anxi generals had followed him, but when Gao Xianzhi had been serving under Wang Chong, he had never seen this General Shi. It was clear that his injuries had been very severe and he was still recuperating in the city. As Shi Yuanqing steadied himself, Wang Chong suddenly stretched out a hand and grabbed Shi Yuanqing's arm. Shi Yuanqing's brow creased as he subconsciously tried to pull back his arm, but even with Shi Yuanqing's cultivation, he was unable to dodge. His arm suddenly went numb as Wang Chong grabbed it, rendering him immobile. Shi Yuanqing's shock was no small matter. His entire body trembled as he raised his head. Because Shi Yuanqing had been recuperating, he had never seen Wang Chong. Thus, he didn't have much of an understanding of him. But now, Shi Yuanqing realized that although this temporary Qixi Protector General was only 16 or 17, he was actually a Saint martial expert, and his cultivation was no weaker than his own. General Shi, don't get distracted. I'll lend you one last hand to recuperate. Wang Chong's voice resounded in Shi Yuanqing's ear, and a moment later, a vast stream of stellar energy surged into Shi Yuanqing's body. Shi Yuanqing was stunned for a moment, but he immediately reacted and focused his mind, borrowing Wang Chong's stellar energy to recuperate from his injuries. The great yin-yang heaven creation art could not only absorb an opponent's energy and return it to them, it could also be used to recuperate from one's injuries. This was a new ability of the great yin-yang heaven creation art that Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor, had comprehended in his later years. However, this technique could only be used when the cultivator of the great yin-yang heaven creation art had reached an extremely high level of saint martial cultivation, and it could only be used on people whose cultivation level did not surpass the user's. Buzz! White steam began to rise from Shi Yuanqing's head, and as Cheng Qianli and the other Anxi generals watched in shock, Shi Yuanqing's pale face began to rapidly turn red. His aura had also stabilized from its chaotic state. Lord Protector General, many thanks. A few moments later, Shi Yuanqing opened his eyes and stared in shock at Wang Chong. He only knew that Wang Chong's military prowess was decent, but he had never heard that Wang Chong's martial prowess was also this astonishing. A 16 or 17-year-old saint martial expert, even in the entire Tang dynasty, was probably an outstanding and transcendent existence. Wang Chong only faintly smiled. As he helped Shi Yuanqing recover, Wang Chong's complexion was a little pale, but it was nothing to worry about. With the power of the great yin-yang heaven creation art, he would need only a few moments to recover. General Shi, since you're helping someone, you should help them to the end. I have something else to give you. As Wang Chong spoke, he suddenly took a few steps forward and whispered a few words into Shi Yuanqing's ear. No one knew what Wang Chong had said, not even the nearby Cheng Qianli. But everyone could see that after Wang Chong finished speaking, Shi Yuanqing turned around and stared in shock at Wang Chong. Lord Protector General, no words can express my gratitude for this great favor. If it really is as you say and we can kill that Khaled and avenge all the soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate army who died at his hands, this Shi will forever be grateful to you. Shi Yuanqing's eyes were red as he spoke these last words. The Anxi Protectorate army only had 30,000 some soldiers, but it had relied on these 30,000 some soldiers to suppress the kingdoms of the western regions and stop the attacks of Uzun and the Western Turks, creating a legend of the western regions. If not for their unity, mutual trust, and brotherly camaraderie, it would have been impossible to accomplish this feat. One could easily imagine Shi Yuanqing's emotions as he watched the hundreds of soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate army being flung into the air by the beast of Arabia and jolted into pieces. He's just a foreigner. There's no need for General Shi to view him so highly. Get ready. Kill him. Wang Chong is waiting for General to sing a song of victory. Wang Chong indifferently said, Kaio. Kaio. Just at this moment, the sound of galloping horses could be heard, and smoke and dust billowed. Waves of earth-shattering battle cries could be heard coming from the opposite side. While Wang Chong had been treating Shi Yuanqing's wounds, Khaled had led his Iron Beast army in a charge. At a distance of 60 to 70 zhang, Everyone could clearly see that the Iron Beast army under Khalid's command was tall and muscular, glaring like a guardian deity. Their entire bodies, including their warhorses, were covered in thick armor that was 2 to 3 inches thick. All of them looked like mechanical beasts. Although the Bakr cataphracts led by Amur were famed for their powerful defenses and thick armor, they still paled in comparison to Khalid's Iron Beast army. There were only 10,000 some people charging together, but the waves of chi they stirred up were like a torrential storm, striking the walls of the steel walls and causing them to clatter and clatter. Even the air in front of the first defense line seemed to twist and blur. Kill them all. When Khalid was still several dozen zhang from the walls, he raised his saber and pointed it forward. That brutal and bloodthirsty roar was like that of a savage beast, making one's heart palpitate in fear. Wang Chong and Cheng Qianli stood side by side, allowing the fierce waves of energy to sweep past them, their faces unperturbed. His gaze shifted to Chen Bin, who was standing in front of the first line of defense. Get ready. Chapter 907. Fire. Boom boom boom. The air trembled as thick crossbow bolts whistled through the air like a storm, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as they whizzed out. In a flash, the aura of death in the air became 100 times thicker. Ballistae. These were the strongest weapons of the Tang dynasty, weapons of slaughter that could intimidate all the clans, and in Wang Chong's hands, they were like the scythe of the god of death. In the first battle with Umar, the more than 70,000 Arab cavalry had crumbled to the dreadful edge of the ballistae. 1,500 ballistae could kill 10,000 Arab cavalry in a single volley. This was their dreadful power. Arab General Khalid gave a savage roar as he stared at the incoming ballista bolts, his eyes flashing with a fierce light. Boom! A pitch-black light erupted from Khalid's body and rapidly expanded. By the time it landed on the ground, it had transformed into 2 massive black and red war halos. The moment these 2 halos appeared, an invisible energy spread across the battlefield, engulfing the tens of thousands of Arab soldiers of the Iron Beast army. In the blink of an eye, the Iron Beast Legion's auras more than doubled. A metallic stream of light quickly enveloped all the Iron Beast Legion soldiers. Not only that, but thousands of miniature black and red war halos appeared beneath their feet, rapidly increasing their strength. The Iron Beast Halo. The Dark Blood Shield. Khalid had instantly used the 2 halos that had made him famous in Arabia. Unlike the other Arab generals, Khalid had 2 extremely high-level war halos. The former could greatly strengthen all the steel parts of the army warriors, including their armor, greatly increasing their defense and hardness, making them like iron beasts. This was also the origin of the name of Khalid's army. As for the latter, the Dark Blood Shield allowed the Arab soldiers under Khalid's command to fuse with their horses, transforming their blood energy into a shield that fused with their armor, strengthening their armor. It was these 2 halos that allowed Khalid's Iron Beast Legion to charge at the forefront in every battle, sweeping through everything before them. Boom, boom, boom. Long crossbow bolts emitted an extremely dangerous aura as they shot out, each accurately hitting a soldier of the Iron Beast army. But in the next moment, something that shocked everyone happened. The tens of thousands of soldiers of the Iron Beast army suddenly formed extremely sturdy blood-colored shields. After the crossbow bolts pierced through the shields, they didn't stop there, piercing through the Iron Beast army behind them. However, it had only pierced through a single soldier of the Iron Beast army. In the past, the ballista bolts had been powerful enough to pierce through 7 or 8 soldiers, but this time, their speed and power had been greatly reduced. It was as if the ballista bolts hadn't pierced through bodies of flesh and blood, but human-shaped steel. Boom, boom, boom. After the first wave of powerful crossbow bolts, the scene of the Iron Beast army collapsing did not appear. Only 1,000 or so of the tens of thousands of Iron Beast army soldiers had fallen. Some of them had managed to avoid being hit in their vitals and had even survived the volley of crossbow bolts. How is this possible? Behind the first line of defense, Chen Bin's expression shook violently as he jerked his head up. Around him, all the ballista soldiers also revealed shocked expressions. Everyone in the world knew of the power of the Tang dynasty's ballistae. They were the harvesting weapons of the god of death. In their first encounter with the Arabs, the 3,000 ballistae had already killed tens of thousands of Arab cavalry. But in the last volley, each ballista bolt had only managed to pierce through 2 or 3 people before running out of steam. Such a situation had never occurred before. For a moment, all the ballista soldiers behind the defense line were deathly still, so shocked that they couldn't speak. I forgot to tell you. Khalid's Iron Beast army has an extremely terrifying defense. Our ballista bolts managed to hit them in the previous battle, but the effect was very limited. A significant portion of the Arab soldiers that climbed up the walls were Khalid's Iron Beast warriors. Lord Protector General had to expend a great deal of his stellar energy to deal with these Iron Beast soldiers, which is why he was heavily injured by Abu Muslim. Cheng Qianli walked up from the rear, his long hair rustling in the wind. These were the Arab soldiers that Abu Muslim had dispatched, and each one of them possessed extraordinary strength, a formidable foe of the Anxi Protectorate army. This battle was not as optimistic as had been imagined. Vice Protector General, there's no need to worry. He's just a brute. There's nothing to fear. And isn't there General Shi? Wang Chong waved his hand, his expression calm and relaxed. This beast of Arabia, Khalid, was truly formidable. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen his 2 halos reduce the power of the ballistae. But even the strongest beast was still a beast, and Wang Chong had several ways to deal with it. But the Qixi Protectorate was much stronger than it had been in the past. There was no need for him to personally participate in a battle of this level. Ready? At this moment, in front of the first defense line, Chen Bin's eyes flashed with a cold glint. He quickly responded and issued a second military order. Everyone hear my order. Adjust the direction. Target the horse's legs. Joints. Fire. Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Bin changed his target from the soldiers of the Iron Beast army to the even weaker joints of the warhorses. Boom. 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 The ballista teams each had 500 soldiers, each taking turns to fire. A total of 1,500 ballista bolts were fired, filling the sky with a torrent of arrows. This time, the ballista bolts were fired from even lower positions. With a heaven-shaking boom, the results of the second round of adjustments were immediately apparent. Ney could hear the shrill whinnies of horses as thousands of legs snapped and countless Iron Beast army soldiers fell from their horses into the dust. Khalid's Iron Beast halo and Dark Blood shield could block the volley of ballista bolts, but they could not protect the weak joints of the warhorses. In the face of the terrifying might of the ballista, all the joints of the warhorses were as fragile as paper. Bang bang bang. Thousands of ballista bolts rained down, each one piercing through the legs of 20 to 30 warhorses. The Iron Beast army, which had been charging with ferocious momentum, was instantly thrown into chaos. Warhorse collided with warhorse, soldier with soldier, and the neighing and bellowing of horses filled the air. Not only that, as Khalid's Iron Beast army fell into chaos, the Arab cavalry charging from the rear were immediately hindered. Some of the cavalry, unable to dodge in time, crashed into the Iron Beast army soldiers in front of them. Dust churned and the sounds of collisions rang out as the entire battlefield descended into chaos. With just a minor adjustment, Chen Bin's ballista army had not killed a single soldier of the Iron Beast army, but it had achieved an effect that no amount of ballista bolts could achieve. Moreover, the entire Iron Beast army had been crippled in this attack. How could there be such a thing? Khalid, who had been so smug and crazed just a moment ago, stared at the ground littered with soldiers. The savage expression on his face instantly froze. In the first volley, only 1,000-some people had died, but in the second volley, the entire army had been wiped out, all the warhorses destroyed. Without their warhorses, the Iron Beast army's strength had dropped by at least half. At best, it was just a few formidable infantry soldiers, far from being an invincible army. Fire! Just as all the Iron Beast army soldiers fell, Chen Bin's expression was cold as he once again gave the order to fire. However, this time, the target was not the warhorses, but the tens of thousands of Iron Beast army soldiers. Damn it! I'll tear you apart! Khalid roared, his entire body exploding with savagery. Slapping his horse, He shot toward the first defense line of the Tang dynasty like a black and red meteor. As Khaled charged forward with thunderous speed, Wang Chong turned his horse around and began to ride toward the second defense line. No matter how ferocious Khaled was, he was just one person. To Wang Chong, the moment the tens of thousands of soldiers of the Iron Beast army were slain, his plan was complete. No matter how formidable the Arabs were, they would still have to deal with his impenetrable defense lines. At the very least, they would not be able to break through these defense lines for a very long time. Next up are the Turks and Tibetans, Wang Chong said. As this thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind, he turned his eyes to the east of the city of Talis. A wolf howl resounded in his ears as the situation on the eastern side of the battlefield underwent an astonishing transformation. Under Wang Chong's gaze, the rising sun in the east suddenly saw tens of thousands of giant wolves charging out from behind the Uzun cavalry and Arab cavalry. These wolves were all baring their fangs and moving extremely quickly. In just a short while, they had already passed all of the cavalrymen. Like a surging tide, they covered the sky and the earth with the power to topple mountains and overturn seas. Wang Chong's vision was filled with these massive wolves. Turkic wolves. As this thought flashed through Wang Chong's mind, his gaze traveled across the plains to the hills on the other side. Under that enormous banner of golden wolves, Wang Chong could see a figure with bright eyes and a hawk-like gaze, a storm of wolves. Only the celestial wolf Great General Dewissely of the Western Turkic Khaganate could bring so many wolves. Before the first wave subsided, another wave rose. Right behind the overwhelming pack of wolves, waves of baby-like cries came from above. Wang Chong raised his head and saw that the sky was filled with dark clouds of Uzun vultures, flying down toward the second defense line. Chapter 908. Daluan Ruozan. Wang Chong didn't need to look to know that this must be Daluan Ruozan's order. Of the two commanders on the eastern battlefield, one used a pack of wolves and the other used a vulture. They launched their own probing attacks from different directions. Whether it was wolves or vultures, these beasts of the plains and highlands, to Dewissely and Daluan Ruozan, they could have as many as they wanted. No matter how many were injured or killed, they wouldn't feel the pinch. But the two of them could use this method to probe Wang Chong's defensive capabilities on the eastern battlefield. Since that's the case, then as you wish. Wang Chong looked at the two bright eyes on the opposite hill, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. No matter what Dewissely and Daluan Ruozan were planning, it was simply wishful thinking to rely on tens of thousands of wolves and vultures to break through his defensive line. Even if they were to probe, the two of them were destined to be unable to find out anything. 20 zhang. 10 zhang. Release. In a flash, a calm voice suddenly sounded from behind the eastern defensive line. The next moment, everyone heard a buzzing sound, like a swarm of bees flying and flapping their wings. Just as the wolves and the vultures in the sky were about to swoop down, countless densely packed holes on the steel walls opened up. Cold light flashed, and hundreds of thousands of arrows burst out from the holes like rain. A whir! A huge green wolf charging at the front couldn't dodge in time, and a bloody hole appeared on its forehead. In an instant, it was nailed to the ground by 6 or 7 sharp arrows. And like the opening of the prelude to death, hundreds of thousands of arrows whistled down from the sky above the huge green wolf, nailing the countless wolves within a range of 70 to 80 zhang in front of the second defensive line to the ground. It wasn't just that. Pooh, pooh, pooh. In midair, vultures cried out in alarm one after another. Their necks, wings, and abdomens were pierced by the rain of arrows, and they fell down like rocks. Below them, they could clearly see the warriors of the Tang dynasty holding huge rectangular steel boxes. The countless holes on the boxes were aimed at the sky. However, such a small change instantly turned the sky into a zone of death. The wolves howled miserably and the vultures cried out in alarm. In just a few breaths of time, the vast sea of wolves and vultures that blotted out the skies in front of the second line of defense were instantly cleared out. As far as the eye could see, there were corpses of these wolves and vultures everywhere. The entire battlefield suddenly fell silent. Buzz! Seeing this scene, Duwusilli's eyelids twitched and his expression changed. What is this? Duwusilli's mind was in turmoil. As he stared at the distant youth, he felt like the world had turned upside down. Although he had come at Daluan Ruozen's invitation with the goal of destroying the Tang dynasty's remaining forces in the western regions, he had never fought with Wang Chong before. Duwusilli had never seen such a terrifying steel contraption that could unleash hundreds of thousands of arrows in an instant. This had completely overturned his understanding of the bow and arrow. Nearby, Daluan Ruozen's eyes were also in turmoil. When he had fought with Wang Chong in the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had only prepared one steel wall after another. In the face of the hundreds of thousands of Mengshi Yusang army, he could only passively defend. He had never had so many terrifying killing weapons. Daluan Ruozen had long ago heard of the beehive in the royal capital's prison, and Wang Chong had also used it against Dian Mangpoch. But hearing it and seeing it were two completely different things. Everyone on the hill felt a deep shock that came from the depths of their souls as they recalled the rain of arrows that had soared into the sky and were as boundless as the sea. Release! Similar voices could be heard not only from the eastern side of the battlefield, but also from the western side of the city of Talas, behind the first defense line. BZZ! Hundreds of thousands of arrows exploded into the air, engulfing the Iron Beast army and the charging Arab soldiers. Release! 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 Tens of thousands of beehives had been installed on the steel walls, each one manned by a soldier. A rain of hundreds of thousands of arrows blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Like a tidal wave, they whizzed out continuously. Although these bolts were far less lethal than ballista bolts, and a significant portion of them were blocked by the Arab armor, when the number of bolts reached a terrifying level, their power was still astonishing. Squelch, squelch, squelch. The sounds of arrows stabbing into bodies could be heard from the western side of Talas. Warhorses and cavalry were covered in arrows before they could even reach the first defense line, and after charging a certain distance, they dropped to the ground. In just a few short moments, the area in front of the first defense line was covered in corpses, piling up into mountains. Fire! Atop the transport carriage, Chen Bin's eyes were cold and aloof as he swung his sword again and again. Wave after wave of ballista bolts were unleashed, each one creating a massive rain of arrows that claimed the lives of many Arab soldiers. The Tang dynasty had expended vast amounts of resources to produce ballista ballistae, a symbol of the highest level of craftsmanship, and on this foreign battlefield, they were displaying their greatest might. In a few short moments, tens of thousands of Arab elites had fallen on the battlefield. But at this moment, the ferocity and fearlessness of the Arabs were on full display. Despite the ballista and beehive bolts, despite the large number of Arabs dying at the first defense line of the Tang dynasty, the Arab army in the rear was still surging forward like a vast ocean. There was no fear of death on their faces. On the contrary, they seemed to be basking in some sort of immense glory. The Arabs were naturally warlike, and dying on the battlefield was an honor. To them, dying on the battlefield was equivalent to returning to the embrace of God, an extremely high blessing and glory. Thus, the Arabs were even stronger and more ferocious than the Uzun or the Turks. Even Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes in shock at the sight of this Arab army charging forward. Before the first wave had even subsided, another wave had risen. Just when the Arabs were charging, tens of thousands of Uzun and Western Turkic cavalry roared as they charged forward. The deaths of tens of thousands of wolves and Turks had failed to strike fear into the hearts of the Uzun and Western Turks. Hushu Wizong, besides the Mutri Great Cavalry, send out everyone else. Daluan Ruozen sat atop an Uzun steed in the howling winds, his eyes fixed forward with a determined expression. There was no need to doubt the strength of the Tang people. In a war with the Tang dynasty, any attempt to avoid losses or defeat the Tang dynasty by paying a small price was impractical and extremely childish. War had sacrifices, and in this battle of Talas, Daluan Ruozen had already prepared for the worst. As long as he could destroy the Anxi Protectorate army and Qixi Protectorate and strangle Wang Chong, all the sacrifices would be worth it. The three-way alliance and decisive battle against the Tang dynasty had to be carried out no matter what. There was no way the Tang dynasty could survive. Zabo, have you finished assembling everything in the back? Daluan Ruozhen took 2 steps forward, not even turning his head as he spoke. Everything's ready. We're just waiting for Prime Minister's order. A voice came from the back. Daluan Ruozhen nodded. Inform the Arabs to move together. In addition, begin. A figure quickly left behind Daluan Ruozhen, vanishing behind the hills. Rumble. Gales howled and warhorses galloped as tens of thousands of Tibetans and Western Turks charged forward. Tens of thousands of wolves once more charged out from the rear of the cavalry, but unlike the first time, when they were still 200-some zhang from the second defense line, the situation suddenly changed. Buzz. In a flash of light, all the Tibetans and Western Turks reached under their horses and took out round and heavy shields. Kill. Destroy them. Occupy the western regions. Kill them. The Uzun and Western Turks did not speak the same language, but at this moment, they seemed to be working together as one army. Their bellies pressed against the backs of their horses, the round shields in their hands raised in front of them like umbrellas, shielding their horses and the majority of their vitals. All the Tang dynasty soldiers behind the second defense line grimaced at this sight. Whether it was the vultures, the wolves, or the round shields, the Uzun and Western Turks had clearly come prepared, fully prepared. Ready! With a clang, Su Kui unsheathed his sword, his cold voice echoing through the defense line. Following Su Kui's order, the 1,500 ballistae behind the second defense line creaked and began to adjust their trajectories. Under the rising sun, they slowly raised their sharp arrowheads and began to take aim at the charging Uzun and Western Turks. But at this moment, Su Kui sensed a flash in his eyes and immediately closed them. Sunlight. Su Kui's heart chilled and his face paled. He hadn't noticed a moment ago, but just as everyone was preparing to take aim, the sun rose from the east, right in front of everyone's eyes. This was also the moment when the Uzun and Western Turks would attack. Could Daluan Ruozhen have even calculated this? Su Kui suddenly felt a deep apprehension. Chapter 909. Lower your eyes and avoid the sunlight. Pay attention to the shadows on the ground. A familiar voice came from the rear. At this moment, Wang Chong suddenly spoke. Upon hearing this voice, everyone immediately fell silent and adjusted their gazes. Su Kui also rapidly calmed down. Change direction. Pay attention to the area below the horse's belly. Get ready. Su Kui swiftly issued a string of orders, but just as he raised his sword and prepared to swing down, there was a shrill whistle as a fist-sized black shadow rapidly expanded on the ground behind the second defense line. Before anyone could react, a massive rock the size of 2 men hugging each other fell from the sky, smashing into the rear of the ballista army. Stone bullet. Mounted on the white-hoofed shadow, Wang Chong's eyes widened at the sight of this massive rock. Careful! But before Wang Chong could issue a warning, a heaven-shaking explosion came from behind him. Wang Chong turned his head and saw thick smoke and flames roiling behind him. On the ground, a thick black liquid was flowing and burning. The flames and smoke had come from this black liquid. Arabian kerosene. Wang Chong's pupils constricted as he immediately recognized what it was. Countless thoughts flitted through his mind, and Wang Chong suddenly understood. Catapults. The Arabs and Uzun had both prepared these things to deal with him. Release. In the east of the battlefield, hundreds of tall catapults stood behind the hills that could not be seen from afar. Next to these catapults, the Uzun soldiers were still removing the wooden components of the catapults and anxiously assembling them. The Uzun plateau was dominated by grasslands, with very few tall trees. All the large lumber used to make these catapults had been purchased by Daluan Ruozhen from the Mengshi Zhao merchants. The structure of Wang Chong's city of steel, its internal connections, and its modular construction were still a secret to all the countries. But Daluan Ruozhen had obtained inspiration from this and thought of a method to make the catapults modular, which he had transported all the way to Talas. The ballistae of the Tang dynasty were renowned throughout the world. invincible and unstoppable on the battlefield. And these constantly assembled catapults were the weapons that Daluan Ruozhen was using to deal with Wang Chong. Release! With just one command, huge rocks immediately soared into the sky from behind the catapults. They drew huge parabolas in the air, passing over the hills and the eastern battlefield, and smashed heavily towards the ballistae behind the first defense line. Boom! One ballista, unable to dodge in time, was struck by a massive stone ball, pulverizing the troop transport beneath it. Pieces of steel, ballista bolts, and even the wheels of the ballista were hurled into the air. The 5 ballista soldiers around the ballista were flung into the air by the immense force, flying like ragdolls. Boom! Another massive boulder crashed down, and 2 Chishi soldiers screamed as they were crushed into meat paste by the falling boulder. 1 boulder, 2 boulders, 3 boulders, 4 boulders. The sharp whistling sound in the sky rang out incessantly. Lifting his head and looking up, he saw hundreds of boulders tumbling in the sky, smashing toward him one after another. Release! At almost the same time, on the western side of the battlefield, behind the more than 200,000 Arab soldiers, massive and imposing catapults more than 10 meters tall were lined up. In front of these catapults, an Arab general, his eyes sharp and vicious, swung down his arm. Boom boom boom. Massive metal balls howled into the air, crossing more than half the battlefield to land between the first and second defense lines. As the metal balls hit the ground, they shattered into countless shards, spilling the thick black Arabian kerosene onto the ground and instantly igniting into flames. One giant metal ball after another fell to the ground, instantly transforming the area behind the first defense line into a sea of fire. In a few short moments, the situation had become extremely disadvantageous to the Tang dynasty. Boom boom boom. Taking advantage of this chaos, the vanguard of the Arab army succeeded in getting close. One Arab soldier after another howled as they slammed into the steel walls and heavy shields at the very front. All the steel walls and heavy infantry shields trembled violently, letting out a series of ear-piercing metallic roars. Charge! Kill them all. All infidels must die. Roars in Arabic resounded through the sky. On the eastern side of the battlefield, the thundering of hooves allowed the Uzun cavalry and Western Turkic cavalry to rapidly approach under the barrage of catapults and the blinding sunlight. And at the very front of these cavalry, the giant wolves were already lunging forward. Marquis, what do we do? The Uzun are aiming at the ballistae. Su Kui's anxious voice came from the front. The situation on the battlefield had changed far too quickly. A moment ago, the Tang army had held the upper hand, but a moment later, the more than 100,000 Tang soldiers had fallen into an extremely disadvantageous position. Can we see where the enemy's catapults are? Wang Chong rode on the back of the white-hoofed shadow, his long hair flapping in the wind. Rock after rock continued to fall, some of them just a few paces from Wang Chong, the shockwaves stirring up by them even striking the white-hoofed shadow. But Wang Chong remained extremely calm. I can't see it. All the catapults are hidden behind the hills. We can't fire at them. Su Kui anxiously said. On their way from Chishi to Talas, they had passed through those hills. It was precisely because they had gotten so close that they had been able to catch Umar and the Arabs off guard. But none of them had expected that Daluan Ruozhen would be using these hills to deal with them. The catapults were in the rear, essentially invincible, and Daluan Ruozhen's formidable calculative abilities allowed him to constantly adjust the direction of the catapults, allowing them to strike at the ballistae. And the weakness of the ballistae being unable to shoot as fast as the catapults was now exposed. Marquis, what do we do? Chen Bin's anxious voice came from behind the first defense line. Large iron balls filled with kerosene kept falling down, and a large number of fire holes burst out. Thick smoke and heat waves were everywhere. Many people were even hit by the kerosene, and their bodies were set ablaze. The roiling smoke even affected the vision of the ballista army. This kerosene was even more powerful than the rock attacks of the Uzun army. Daluan Ruozhen. Wang Chong's eyes flashed with cold light as he looked across the first defense line, at the fierce eyes of the white yak atop the hill. If one were to say that Daluan Ruozhen had not come prepared, That all of this was just a coincidence, Wang Chong would never believe it. It was obvious that Daluan Ruozen had prepared for a very long time to deal with him. At the very least, Daluan Ruozen's catapults had not been prepared in a short period of time. Marquis, I'll lead the Wushang cavalry in a charge and destroy those catapults. A tightly clenched voice came from the side amidst the torrential rain of rocks. Li Sai's eyes were blazing with killing intent. The situation was urgent, and Daluan Ruozen had at least several hundred catapults, all of them out of range. The rolling hills were the best protection for the catapults. The situation was rapidly becoming dangerous for the more than 100,000 Tang soldiers. There's no need. At this moment, a voice rang out. As the winds howled, Wang Chong listened to the crashing of the catapults and the screams of the army. His face remained resolute and extremely composed. The current situation is not that dangerous. Moreover, Duwisili, Huishu Wizong, and Dusong Mangpoj are all on the hills. How do you plan to get through? Li Sai's expression froze, and he froze on the spot, unable to speak. Duwisili, Huishu Wizong, Dusong Mangpoj, Uzun, and the best great generals of the Western Turkic Khaganate were all gathered here. They were like a mountain, an insurmountable chasm. This natural moat was even more difficult to cross than the hills. Although Li Sai would eventually become an imperial great general with the title of Invincible Great General, that was a matter for the future. At the very least, he had not reached that level yet. In fact, he was still half a step away from breaking into the Saint Martial realm. If he encountered 3 powerful great generals, he would be doomed. But, milord, are we just going to watch Marquis? Li Sai spitefully said, his heart filled with unwillingness. Wang Chong said nothing, his eyes fixed on that azure-robed figure on the hill, countless thoughts flitting through his mind. Daluan Ruozen had made far more preparations than he had imagined. The Arabian ballistae were renowned throughout the world, and if Daluan Ruozen had been paying attention to him this entire time, he would have gathered a great deal of information on them. These catapults were hidden to be used against him. But no matter how much preparation Daluan Ruozen had made, he was destined to fail. Because he was far from the only one who had prepared for this battle. Senior Zhang, get ready. Wang Chong suddenly said. Yes, Marquis. An elderly voice came from behind him. Stunned, Li Sai turned his head and saw that Zhang Shouji, dressed in a black robe, was standing on a carriage. At some point, he had appeared behind him. After giving a respectful bow, Zhang Shouji did not even look at Li Sai. Instead, he led his 10-some personal disciples toward the towering city of Talas, quickly vanishing through the city gates. Chen Burang, you go as well. In this battle, we need your strength to deal with the Arabs and Uzun. Chapter 9-10. Understood. Chen Burang had a solemn expression on his face, apparently waiting for Wang Chong's order. I will definitely not fulfill Marquis' request. Chen Burang respectfully bowed and then turned around. Summoning his horse, he galloped off into the distance, stirring up a cloud of dust as he followed Zhang Shouji into Talas. With everything taken care of, Wang Chong's gaze shifted, and he quickly returned to his senses. All infantry and axemen, pay attention. Clear out any wolf pack that breaks in. Beehive teams, get ready to clear out the area. Ballista teams, fire at will. Wait for the order to retreat. Xue Qinjun, pass on the order to the first defense line. Bury the Arabian kerosene in sand and immediately extinguish the fire. Craftsmen, set up bunkers. Logistics teams, get ready to repair the ballistae. In a few short moments, Wang Chong issued a string of orders. His eyes were calm and wise, as if nothing in the world could shake his mind. At the same time, the disorderly army, under Wang Chong's orders, began to adopt a series of effective tactics. A hunting team was quickly formed to snipe the green wolves and kill any Turkic wolves that got past the defense line. Meanwhile, a sand team was tasked with extinguishing the fires and quickly began to bury the black kerosene. The raging fires and smoke were quickly brought under control. Although the flames were still burning, they were several times weaker than before and no longer as intimidating as before. More importantly, The clear and effective orders immediately calmed the army. Although people were still being crushed to death or burned to death, even the mercenaries of the western regions who had fought alongside the Chishi Protectorate for the first time had calmed down. Do you see? In order to deal with the Tang people, the Arabs and I prepared for so long, but he only needed a few moments to calm down an army of more than 100,000. Even those scattered mercenaries from the western regions were subdued by him. How many people can command a battle formation and react so quickly? To the east of the battlefield on a high hill, a strong wind blew. Daluan Ruozhen stood with his hands clasped behind his back, silently looking into the distance. A profound light flashed in his eyes. Even though Wang Chong was his opponent, Daluan Ruozhen could not help but gasp in admiration and amaze at his talent in the art of war. Even though the Ngari royal lineage had been destroyed, even though more than 200,000 cavalry had been buried in the southwest, Daluan Ruozhen had nothing to say about his loss. Some people's talents were like the bright sun in the sky. They were so dazzling that no one could ignore them. In fact, as his opponent, he couldn't help but feel that it was a blessing to be able to fight against such an opponent. It's a pity that we're still opponents. With such a person around, neither the Uzun nor the Western Turks can rest in peace. This is why I contacted General to deal with him. This kind of person must die. Dewusili said nothing, only turned to look at the carefree Daluan Ruozhen with a strange look on his face. Since they were mortal enemies, it was naturally best to kill each other. To Dewusili, someone like Daluan Ruozhen who admired his opponent on the battlefield was extremely strange. This was not Dewusili's style. Prime Minister is truly an interesting person. Dewusili smirked, the corners of his lips slowly curling up as he looked into the distance, a hint of cruelty in his eyes. I've never respected my opponents. I only like to kill them. Whoever makes an enemy out of me will only meet a dead end. Only a dead enemy is my favorite enemy. Daluan Ruozhen glanced back, faintly smiled and said no more. In the end, people were different. A rock was different from an eagle, and a dragon was different from a tiger. In the end, Dewusili was a fierce general, not a wise one. Pass on my order. Increase the intensity of the attacks. In addition, bring the Tang dynasty's steel walls into the range of our attacks. Daluan Ruozhen lightly waved his sleeve, not even turning his head as he gave his order. Yes, Prime Minister. A messenger hastily departed. Daluan Ruozhen gave a satisfied nod. Everything was on the right track. Uzun's rain of rocks and the Arabs' kerosene were already showing their effects, and the Tang people's attacks had been suppressed. If everything went as expected, the Tang dynasty was certain to lose this battle. Prime Minister. Suddenly, a voice rang out, quickly attracting everyone's attention. It was one of the Uzun generals at Daluan Ruozhen's side. He had raised an arm, but his finger was not pointing at the battlefield, but at the towering city of Talas. In a flash, Daluan Ruozhen, Washu Wizong, Dusong Mangpoj, and even the nearby Dewusili were all startled and subconsciously looked in the direction of his finger. As they climbed up the mottled, smoky, and majestic walls of Talas, they could clearly see the gleam of steel in the southeast corner of the walls. Under the light of the morning sun, the Tang dynasty soldiers on the walls were busily setting up rows of strange and complicated steel components. What are they doing? Dewusili subconsciously asked. Even though he was one of the Western Turkic great generals who had participated in many battles and even defeated Biding Protector General in Sishun, he had never seen anything like this before. But Dewusili had never seen anything like this before. I don't know. Daluan Ruozhen only replied with a single sentence, his eyelids constantly twitching. There was no such thing in his records, but this instinctive reaction gave Daluan Ruozhen a bad feeling. No matter what those steel installations on the walls of the city of Talas were, they were nothing good for Uzun or the Western Turks. That's impossible. Could it be that he's prepared? As this thought flashed through his mind, Daluan Ruozhen's face paled. He could not believe that Wang Chong had predicted this battle and prepared many catapults to deal with him. But just as this thought flitted through his mind, Daluan Ruozhen heard a massive boom. Rumble! A massive black silhouette flew over the hills, over the heads of the three great generals, and toward the back of the hills. On the hills, Duwusilly narrowed his eyes, a sharp light flashing through them. Clang! A saber clattered like a dragon. No one could see how Duwusilly had attacked, but a moment later, a dazzling saber glow soared into the sky like a waterfall. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the black silhouette flying over their heads several dozen zhang away was cleaved in two and exploded into countless fragments that rained down from the sky. But a moment later, a heaven-shaking explosion came from behind him. As Duwusilly swung his scimitar, a catapult that had just finished loading and was about to be thrown was instantly smashed apart by a massive rock falling from the sky. Daluan Ruozhen, Duwusilly, Huishu Wuzong, and Dusong Mengpoj all paled. Catapults! At this moment, everyone understood. The steel equipment Wang Chong had set up on the walls of the city of Talas was actually a catapult, a steel catapult at that. And from their effects, they were even more powerful than Daluan Ruozhen's wooden catapults. Release. Daluan Ruozhen's catapult formation was not the only one under attack. On the western side of the city of Talas, on the wall facing the Arabs, Chen Burang's right hand swung down, and row after row of heavy steel catapults began to fire. Massive rocks howled into the air, arcing through the air and crashing into the rear of the more than 200,000 Arab soldiers. Bang! Massive rocks rained down on the Arab catapults, smashing apart the 10-meter-tall catapults. Boom! One of the rocks smashed into a small mountain of metal balls next to a catapult, pulverizing the metal balls and causing the black kerosene within them to spill over the ground. One of the Arab generals standing guard was too slow to react and was splashed by the black kerosene. Not good. Careful. This attack was so sudden that the Arab general standing guard next to the catapult formation paled. But before he could react, a fire arrow pierced through the air and into the black kerosene. Bang! Flames soared into the sky, igniting even the Arab soldiers who had been stained by the black kerosene. Screams resounded through the air, opening the curtain on this attack. Boom! 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 Under Chen Burang's command, one massive rock after another fell from the walls of the city of Talas, smashing into the Arab catapult formation. The attacks of the catapults were random and had no accuracy to speak of. The range of their attacks was also rather large, completely incomparable to the accuracy of the ballistae. But the ferocious attacks of these steel catapults, coupled with Chen Burang's extraordinary perception and hearing, immediately unleashed a frightening power. Although these steel catapults were not as accurate as the ballistae, under Chen Burang's command, their accuracy was rather frightening. Boom boom boom. Hundreds of rocks were hurled from the walls of Talas, aimed at the metal balls piled up around the catapults. As these metal balls were smashed apart, the black kerosene stored within them poured out and flowed freely on the ground. Every time this happened, there would be a fire arrow that would suddenly fly over and land on the ground, causing a huge fire that soared into the sky. The entire Arab catapult formation had been transformed into a sea of fire. Thick plumes of smoke soared into the sky and blotted out the sunlight. Change directions. Aim at the walls of Talas. It's useless. They're too high up. Our range isn't enough. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.